What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to do a full story video. A full story video is when I sit down and take a bunch of videos that tell one overarching story and combine them together into one big video. Now, today's full story video is going to be about Batman Knightquest, the second part in the Nightfall trilogy. Now, when it comes to Knightquest, it does take place after you have Bruce Wayne passing on the mantle of Batman over to John Paul Valley, but also you had John Paul being the Batman to take down Bane. And so now the question is, what would Gotham be like with John Paul Valley now being the Batman of Gotham City? Could he be a good Batman, or could he be a horrible Batman? And so we got a series of stories to kind of show us what it would be like with John Paul Valley now Batman for Gotham City. And so today's full story video is going to be all those different stories coming together in one big video. And so I do hope you enjoy today's full story video. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over Batman Nightfall. And technically, we're now diving into Batman Knightquest, the second part in the whole Nightfall trilogy. Now, Knightquest is really more establishing the idea that John Paul Valley is now Batman. Now, technically, he became Batman back in Nightfall after Bruce Wayne got his back broken by Bane, and you had John Paul Valley become the next Batman. But Knightquest is more of Bruce Wayne is gone. Alfred is gone. Robin is now being kicked out of the Batcave. Like, technically, to John Paul Valley, he is the only hero in Gotham City. Now, there are other heroes in Gotham, but for John Paul, he is the only one who can truly protect Gotham City. And that is really huge. Now, Knightquest also does set a lot of things in all the different Batman titles. And really, around the same time we got Knightquest, we got the first solo ongoing Robin series, and that was a huge moment in DC Comics. It really showed how popular Tim Drake was in the 1990s. So you had Robin on his own in Gotham, while you had Knightquest going on in his John Paul Valley on his own. It really showed a lot of things happening in Gotham City in all the different Batman titles. Now, today's video, we're going to cover really Detective Comics issue number 667 and 668. This two-part story arc, again, it really does start off the whole idea of John Paul Valley becoming the Batman of Gotham City, but also this two-part story arc does set up the very first issue of Robin number 1, the ongoing series. So as we dive into Detective Comics issue number 667, we actually pick up with John Paul being Batman. Now, the opening pages of this book is trying to tell us that after John Paul was able to take down Bane, no one else, no other super villains have been really trying to cause chaos in Gotham. Now, John Paul Valley only has to deal with like your petty thieves, your small time thugs, and that is really it. And so as we see in the opening pages, you do have a family trying to get away from a set of thugs, and you have John Paul Valley being able to step in and take down those thugs. And once he does that, he begins to head back home to the Bat Cave. But now we have to jump over to New Jersey. And the reason why, because we're now picking up with a bank being robbed by a cowboy. Yeah, you heard that right. A cowboy is now robbing a bank. But then another cowboy walks into the bank as well. And both cowboys are trying to rob the place. Now, you have each robber wondering why the other one is there for. But then they realize they look alike. And bam, we're now getting our first introduction of the Trigger Twins. The Trigger Twins are, well, twins who were unfortunately separated at birth. but they both grew up, became robbers, and now they are meeting each other for the first time. And so they work together to rob the bank and they leave. And then they head over to a nearby bar to get the chance to know each other. But after doing that, they realize that both of them are heading to the same place. And of course, that would be Gotham City. Now, I want to jump over to John Paul Valley, who's currently having a nightmare. Now, before we dive into his nightmare, I kind of want to sit down and talk about his past for the sake of this video and other videos down the road. Let me explain. So, John Paul Valley used to belong to the Order of St. Dumas. Now, when it came to the Order of St. Dumas, he was their avenging angel. Anytime somebody had crossed the order, they would send him to take care of that person. Now, he was only part of the order for a very short period of time, because by the time he became Azrael, he met Batman and he joined the Bat family. Now, the only reason why John Paul had joined the Order of St. Dumas was because of his father, who was the previous Azrael, but his father died. And of course, it led way for John Paul to take up the mantle. Now, before his father had died, he made sure to place something called the system inside the mind of John Paul. Now, the system allows John Paul to be completely ready to be Azrael. That means the perfect fighter, knows how to use all the different kinds of weapons, to know the complete history of the Order of St. Dumas, so that he can just jump in so easily. Now, the problem is sometimes when a system takes over his mind and body, he becomes a whole lot darker, where he is not afraid to cross that line when he's going up against certain enemies in the world of DC Comics. And so when we jump over to John Paul, he's having this nightmare where he's being confronted by the patron known as Saint Dumas. Now, when he does meet Saint Dumas, he's kind of like, what in the world is going on? And you have Saint Dumas say, you are chosen for a lonely crusade, called to battle in the dark city, in place of one who has fallen. You are to be transformed, a noble transformation. You are, or you were, an angel, but now it's time for you to become a demon if the dark city is going to be redeemed. And so now it seems like John Paul Valley is going to have a new mission. And so after having that nightmare or that dream, he then goes to the Batcave to work on the Bat suit. But then he realized that Harold is no longer around in the Batcave. Now, Harold was this character who had a medical condition where, unfortunately, he looked like a hunchback and he was also mute. But Harold was great with technology and gadgets. And so when it came to Bruce Wayne Batman gadgets, they all came from Harold. But the problem is, Harold left the Batcave back in Nightfall. And so for John Paul, he's kind of wondering, where in the world is Harold? And where is the dog as well? And so he goes to explore the Batcave. But when he does, he finds a Batmobile that's attached to a subway line. And his subway line is attached to Gotham's complete subway line, which means if John Paul wants to use this as a way to get around Gotham City, he can use this, which is a whole lot faster than just the regular Batmobile. And so for John Paul Valley, he's kind of excited about this. But getting back over to the Trigger Twins, we do learn the Trigger Twins are trying to rob a certain monster known as Danny Doyle. And really, they come into his hideout, killing off his guards and demanding him to hand over the money that he currently has. Now, you had Danny say, you know what? I'd rather not kill you guys, but I also rather not get shot either. So how about this? What if we actually work together? Because I can promise you a whole lot of money if you just work with me. And so you have the twins kind of realize that maybe that is a good offer that they should most likely accept. Now I want to jump over to Tim Drake. And the reason why, because Tim was going through a lot at the moment in DC Comics because Bruce Wayne had left, Alfred has left, his father has been kidnapped, and that is the reason why Bruce and Alfred had left Gotham. Oh, by the way, the new Batman does not want a Robin at all. And so for Tim Drake, he kind of feels like he's just left out of a lot of different things. He hates the idea of being alone. Now, the reason why I want to jump over to Tim Drake, because when it came to Bruce Wayne, he made sure to build a passageway that led straight under the home of the Drakes, because Tim and his father, they were actually neighbors to Bruce Wayne. And so Tim would use that as a way to get into the Batcave. But the problem is John Paul. He hated the idea of Tim Drake being around the Batcave because he does not want to Robin at all. And so when you have Tim trying to take that passageway over to the Batcave, he comes to find out it has been completely walled off by John Paul. It's John Paul saying, nobody else is allowed in the Batcave. Not even you, Tim Drake, who was Robin before I became Batman. Now, I want to jump back over to the Trigger Twins, because you do have the Trigger Twins working for Danny Doyle, going after his different rivals. And honestly, they're doing a good job taking out all of these different rivals and being able to collect the money off killing those different rivals. And so we're going to see them for a while in Batman comics. But it's time for us to jump back over to John Paul Valley. Because you have John Paul still driving his new Batmobile. But here's the problem though. His new ride is attached to the subway lines, all the subway lines in Gotham City. And so he did not try to remember all the different schedules for all the different trains in Gotham. And so while you have John Paul just enjoying his new ride, unfortunately, one of the lines he does take is about to have him crash into an oncoming train. And it could lead into a very severe incident. But getting into Detective Comics issue number 668, we actually see that John Paul is able to survive because when Harold had made this Batmobile, he made sure it had the ability to just change direction at an instant. And so even though at first it's about to crash into this oncoming train, you have John Paul being able to change it into the other direction to get the heck out of there before he had crashed into the train. So yes, John Paul was able to survive, but just barely. Now, getting back over to Tim Drake, we see him back at the mansion, but we do see that he had received some mail. And we kind of find out that Tim Drake has received his driver license. And so for Tim, this is great because there is a vehicle that Bruce had made just for Tim Drake. And so for Tim, he's all like, this is perfect. All I want to do right now is just change into my Robin outfit, sneak into the Batcave to get the vehicle that actually belongs to me because of Bruce Wayne. But now we have to set up the twins about to pull off one heck of a robbery very soon in Knightquest. You see, you have the twins go back over to Dan Doyle to get paid for killing off all his rivals. Now, while doing that, he then says, hey, you know, I have this master scheme that I have been cooking up for about 10 years now, and I feel like this is the perfect time to try to pull off this scheme. And so we do learn that apparently Dan has been trying to rob something called the money train. You see, when it comes to Gotham's subway system, they have 1 million people riding the subways per day, but per day they are able to make $3 million. Now at the end of the day, you have 4 trains take all that money to one location, to one station. And so you have Dan say, I believe that we might be able to rob one of the trains that's holding the money. And I feel like my master plan is just ready to actually go now. So are you guys down? And you have the twins kind of wondering if this is going to work out. Now, getting back over to Robin, you have Tim Drake being able to find a way into the Batcave. But the problem is he realized that John Paul made sure to block off all paths into the Batcave. Not all of them, but making sure that it's not easy to actually get into the Batcave. For example, there was a way into the Batcave through Wayne Manor. Apparently, that's also gone as well. This man is living in this hanging down the Batcave at all times unless he's out there being Batman. Now, he's not there at the moment in the Batcave, which allows Tim to get into the Batcave to find his vehicle. Now, while in the Batcave, he does realize that John Paul has not cleaned up the place after Bane had came in there and broke Bruce's back. But he also realized that John Paul had added a shooting range into the place. And for Robin, that's really scary because now it shows that John Paul is not afraid to shoot people. Now, currently, it's just batarangs, but it could lead down to using actual guns. Who knows? But either way, you have Tim say, let me go ahead, get my vehicle, and get the heck out of here before he knows that I was here. The problem is, John Paul has set up sensors and cameras in the place to tell him when someone's in there. And so either way, he's gonna find out that Tim was there. But we jump over to LA and we pick up with a movie producer who's trying his best to get his kids' movie off the ground. But while trying to do that, he does get a call from somebody. And his somebody is the Joker. Now, really, you have the book try to hide the idea who this person could possibly be calling up the movie producer, but you can clearly tell it is the Joker. But it's the Joker saying, hey, I got an idea about a movie. You should do a movie about the most mastermind criminal of all time. And so this is the Joker trying his best to get his own movie that tells his life story. Now, the ending of this book is really more of Robin tripping off one of the alarms to tell John Paul that Robin is in the Batcave, who's trying to get his vehicle, the one that Bruce Wayne made for him. And so while you have John Paul go confront Robin, he reminds Robin that he said multiple times that he, Tim Drake, is not welcome in the Batcave at all. But on top of that, he believes that Batman, this Batman, does not need a Robin. Now, this is John Paul acting way darker than usual. And so when you have Tim trying his best to talk to John Paul, saying like, hey man, listen, even though you are Batman, I was told by Bruce to keep an eye on you. But for John Paul, he does not want to be watched at all. He truly believes that he'll be okay without any kind of help at all. But he's also talking about his crusade to save Gotham. And that kind of shows that there's something wrong with John Paul. It seems like the system from the Order of St. Dumas has once again taken over his mind. But you do have the two characters go back and forth. Now for Robin, he's not really prepared to take down John Paul. I mean, this kid could not take down Batman. If Bruce had decided that John Paul should be the next Batman, that means Tim is also not ready to take down John Paul. And so while you have Tim trying his best to just get the heck out of there, or to at least take down John Paul, well, he shows why he is a superior fighter. And so you have John Paul getting to the point where it does seem like he might kill off Tim Drake. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest, the actual second part of the Nightfall trilogy. Now, with that being said, we're going to jump back over to Shadow of the Bat. Now remember, when it came to DC Comics in the 1990s, they had a lot of different titles out there for just Batman alone. Like, dude had Batman, Detective Comics, you had Robin, you also had Shadow of the Bat, you had Catwoman, you had all these different books just about Gotham and Batman and the Batman family. Either way though, today's video is going to be about Shadow of the Bat, written by Alan Grant, who gives us a two-part story arc that is actually about Knightquest, where you have John Paul Batman going up against a new character known as the Tallyman. But also, we kind of dive deeper into the mind of John Paul Valley, and with him being Batman of Gotham City. Now, just in case you are new to our channel or new to comics and you don't really know what's going on, let me explain. You see, when it came to DC Comics, they had a great idea of getting rid of Bruce Wayne by using a new character around that time, better known as Bane, to break the Bat, which he did by breaking the back of the Bat. And so Bruce Wayne was no longer able to be Batman until he was able to properly heal. But he needed somebody to take over as Batman. Now, you would think you'll pick Dick Grayson, but around this time in DC Comics, Dick and Bruce were not on speaking terms. And so you had Bruce choose someone else. And he chose John Paul Valley to become the next Batman in Gotham City. Now, later on in this video, I'm going to dive deeper into the actual background of that character, but also the order he actually works for, better known as the Order of Saint Dumas. But let's go ahead and dive into today's video. And so we do pick up with the first chapter for today's video, Shadow of the Bat, issue number 19, written by Alan Grant. Now, before we dive into today's video, there's something else I do want to mention. You see, around this point in DC Comics, crime has dropped down dramatically in Gotham City thanks to John Paul being Batman. Now, the question is John Paul a better Batman than Bruce Wayne? Because yes, crime has dropped down a lot in Gotham, but at the same time, John Paul is way darker than Bruce Wayne was, way more brutal than Bruce Wayne was against criminals. Either way, we do pick up with John Paul going after a motorcycle gang who is currently attacking an elderly fellow. Now, with that being said, you have John Paul being able to take down every single member of the gang. But after doing that, you have John Paul kind of wondering some things about himself, because he realized that he was very brutal against this gang, very dark, and he kind of wonders if Bruce Wayne was ever in this position at all. And so for John Paul, he wants to take a step back and have a better chance to get to know himself better, to understand what kind of man he truly is. But now we have to jump over to another character known as Big Mike. Now, Big Mike is one of the many crime bosses in Gotham City. Really, one of the last few crime bosses in Gotham City. Because like I said earlier, when it comes to crime in Gotham City, it has dropped down dramatically because of John Paul being Batman. And that includes most of the crime bosses as well. And so Big Mike was able to just move up very easily. Now, we do see Big Mike just having a good old time trying to celebrate his birthday, but unfortunately, he's then confronted by the Tallyman. Now, the Tallyman is only here because of somebody else, another character known as Joey Lado. Now, Joey was another crime boss, but who was just recently taken down by John Paul Batman. And so apparently the Tallyman came here to get revenge for Joey, to take down Big Mike, but to also take down Batman, because Batman was the one to take down Joey. But the rumor is Big Mike may have helped out to bring down Joey, may have led John Paul Valley over to Joey to take him down, to allow Big Mike to move up the chains once again. Either way, you do have the Tallyman being able to kill off Big Mike just like that. But I want to jump back over to John Paul for a brief moment. And the reason why, because we do see John Paul being able to sneak into Gotham New Age supplies. Inside of there is a isolation tank. Now with this tank, you have John Paul get inside to be locked in, but to also dive deeper into his mind, to hopefully discover more about who he is. And so he does remove his costume and get inside the actual chamber. Now, once you have John Paul inside that chamber, you did have John Paul begin to see different images of things he already knew about himself. The idea of being part of the Order of Saint Dumas, the idea of being Azrael, their avenging angel, the idea of Bruce Wayne getting his back broken by Bane and taking up the mantle as Batman, but also defeating Bane. But for John Paul, he wants to know more about himself. And so you have John Paul dive deeper into his mind, where he unlocks certain things that were locked away from him. The days when his dad had basically installed the system inside of him. Now, we had talked about the system before. You see, when it comes to the actual system, it was something given to him by his father. John Paul's father was the previous Azrael for the Order of St. Dumas. You see, the Order of St. Dumas, anytime somebody had crossed them, they would send out their avenging angel. And of course, that would be Azrael. Now, like I said, John Paul's father was the previous Azrael before John Paul was. But John Paul's father knew that one day he might possibly die, and he wanted to make sure that his son would be ready to take up the mantle as Azrael. And so you had John Paul's father installed the system. Now, the system was put in the mind of John Paul to make sure the day comes he will be properly ready to take up the mantle, meaning that as soon as he has to become Azrael, he will have all the knowledge of the Order of St. Dumas, but also all the knowledge of how to be a great fighter, a skilled fighter. And so for John Paul, he's now seeing those moments that were locked away from him when his dad was slowly installing the system. And apparently, it all started when John Paul was just a baby. Now, I want to jump back over to the Tally Man because we do learn that the Tally Man is currently looking for Johnny, the brother to Big Mike. And so you have the Tally Man go over to the penthouse that belongs to Johnny, where you have the Tally Man being able to interrogate the wife of Johnny to get the info that he was looking for. But now we have to jump back over to, well, John Paul. And you have John Paul still kind of diving deep into his own mind. Now, with that being said, we see John Paul going to the point where he's beginning to learn a small piece of the origin of the Order of St. Dumas. So we have to jump back 900 years ago where the order was actually created. At the same time, the Knights of the Templar was also created. Now, both groups, they had the same goal, which was to retake the Holy City. But there was something else in that part of time. You see, we're being told that both groups had discovered the mystic secrets of the long-lost Temple of Solomon, and those secrets that had brought them power and wealth beyond all measure. Now, with all that wealth, you actually had the Order of St. Dumas being able to build a very powerful group, a powerful secret empire. Now, for John Paul, he kind of wanted to know, why would they use all that kind of money, all those huge amount of gold to build up an empire that stays in the shadows? What is the main purpose of that? But he also wants to know, why do they need an Azrael for? But the problem is he's unable to figure out more secrets about the order at this moment. And the reason why? Because of the system. The system is preventing him to figure out more things about the Order of St. Dumas. And now the question is, why is the system doing that to him? Now, with that being said, there is another reason why he is unable to dive deeper into his mind. You see, let's not forget, he's currently in some kind of isolation chamber. But while being inside there, well, that is the moment some thugs come into the warehouse. They use that warehouse for their own operations. And they see Batman's gear just laying out in the middle of the warehouse. And they believe that he's currently inside the isolation chamber, which he is, but in a different one. There were two different isolation chambers in that warehouse, and they chose the wrong one. And so after you had the thugs go ahead and shoot up the wrong one, you didn't have Batman come out of the other one to take them down and stuff them inside the isolation chamber. Now, the Tally Man, he does hear the gunshots and he does run over to the actual warehouse. Now, he does see two different isolation chambers, the one that got shot up and the one Batman actually used. Now, he does go over to the one that was shot up. He looks inside and he finds the two thugs who, well, shot up that one, but were taken down by Batman earlier, and we see that John Paul has stuffed them inside that one actual chamber. Now, we do learn one of the guys is actually Johnny, the brother to Big Mike, and really the Tally Man was looking for Johnny. And so you have the Tally Man say, hey, you know what? You're going to go down to the, HELL to see your brother, but also now I can just go after Batman. Because remember, for the Tallyman, he's doing all of this as a way to get payback for Joey, somebody who was a mob boss in Gotham, but unfortunately was taken out by Batman because of Big Mike and Johnny. But now it's just Batman left on his list. And so you have the Tallyman leave the warehouse. Now, the last page of this chapter is really more of John Paul just trying to think about what he went through inside the isolation chamber. But while doing that, he's then caught off guard by, well, the Tallyman, who was able to begin to shoot at Batman. And that leads into the second chapter of this two-part story arc. And so now it's time for us to enter into Shadow of the Bat issue number 20, also written by Alan Grant. Now, the opening pages of this chapter, we do pick up with, well, you have the Tallyman being able to get a few hits on Batman by firing off a few bullets at him. Now, Batman is trying his best to regroup himself after falling off the edge of the building, but this chapter alone is going to begin the process of us learning more about the Tallyman. You see, we learned many years ago when the Tallyman was just a, young boy, he only had his mom and his sister around. His dad was not around, and we'll learn more about that here in a moment. But we do know that every Friday when he was a young boy, he would see this monster come by and demand his mother to pay him his money. The problem was the Tallyman's mother did not have enough money to pay this man, but to also feed her children. But this guy did not care at all. The only thing he cared for was the money. And so he told her, you better give me my money. I don't care if your kids starve or not. I want the money that's owed to me. And this begins us learning a tad bit more about the character, the Tallyman. Now, you do have John Paul being able to get back into the battle. And with them being able to get back into the battle, his main goal is to go up against, well, the Tallyman, to figure out why the Tallyman is coming after him for. Now, you have the Tallyman say, because what you did to Joey Beto. Now remember, he killed off Big Mike and Johnny because of this Joey character. Now at first, we were kind of left to believe that Joey was somebody who was arrested that didn't allow Big Mike to move up the chains. But apparently Joey was killed off, and apparently Batman was involved. But the problem is, it was not John Paul Batman, it was Bruce Wayne Batman that somehow got involved in the idea of this Joey character getting murdered. Either way, you do have John Paul trying to explain things to the Tallyman, but he's not trying to listen. Now, we do dive into another flashback for the Tallyman. And so we do learn that apparently the Tallyman's father had died when he was a young boy. But the problem was his father had a lot of debt that was owed over to the mobster. And so the mobster said, I don't care if the dad died or not. You, now Tallyman's mother, has to pay me the money your husband owed me before he had died. And so one day, once again, she was short on the cash and he began to beat on her. And so the Tallyman got so mad over the idea of this monster beating on his mother, he grabbed a fire poker and beat the monster to death. Now, apparently, after you have the Tallyman commit that crime, and even though he was trying to protect his mother, he did commit murder. And so he was locked up for the crime that he had committed. Now, with that being said, the Tallyman was locked up in a facility for young boys who had committed vicious crimes. And apparently, while being inside there, he was picked on heavily by criminals left and right. But it gets worse. You see, after he was able to leave that prison, he finds out that his mother had hung herself. And his sister, well, she died of starvation. This man was left alone after being able to go back home after being locked up in prison, Now for John Paul Valley, in this battle, this man has been beaten down so badly by the Tallyman, it does seem like he's not really able to continue on, and all his injuries are catching up to him. But then he has a vision where his father is calling out to him saying, Azrael, John Paul, get up. You are Azrael, the avenging angel. You don't quit this easily. You keep going until you are technically dead in the ground. And so you have John Paul being able to get right back up once again and go for one more round against the Tallyman. Now, for the Tallyman, there's only one way this battle is going to end if one of them ends up dead. And so you have the two characters go at it. Now, for Batman, John Paul, the system takes over his mind and body again. And remember, the system was put in his mind to allow him to be a great fighter, to allow him the chance to take on anybody who comes at him. And so right now, the Tallyman thinks, okay, you know what? I've been doing a good job. It's time for me to go ahead and take down the Batman. But the system takes over. It allows John Paul to be able to easily take down the Tallyman. But John Paul is way too brutal. And it does seem like he is about to kill off the Tallyman. Matter of fact, once you have John Paul being able to regain control of his mind and body from the system, he realized that with one more punch, he would have killed the Tallyman. And so you have Batman just walk away. But he technically did win that battle. And the last thing we have to talk about is Harvey Dent and Jim Gordon finding the body of the Tallyman. Now, he's alive, but the man was so badly beaten by John Paul Valley that it looks nasty to look at the body of this man. But okay, so let's get back into our coverage over Knightquest. I know it has been a while, but we're going to go ahead and dive right back into it. Now, this is another two-part story arc in Knightquest where you technically have Batman going up against a new character coming into Gotham City. Now, remember, this is not Bruce Wayne Batman. This is John Paul Valley Batman because thanks to Nightfall, as we saw, Bane broke the back of Bruce Wayne. And so he was no longer able to be Batman. And so it led the door open for somebody else to become Batman, and that gave us John Paul Valley. Now, you fans out there wondering, hey, why not Dick Grayson? Well, it was told to us back in Nightfall that technically Bruce Wayne and Dick were not really on talking terms, and really Dick told Bruce that he is trying to become his own man. And so for that reason, you have Bruce say, hey, Dick is out there on his own. He cannot be Batman. So I got someone else I met earlier, better known as Azrael, but John Paul Valley, to become Batman. And so when it comes to Knightquest, we're going to see John Paul be the Batman of Gotham City and see how different characters are kind of reacting to him being the Batman. Now, something else I do want to mention about the character is the whole idea that John Paul Valley was Azrael before he was Batman. Let me explain. So there was an organization out there known as the Order of St. Dumas. Now, when it came to the Order of St. Dumas around this time in DC Comics, they were still somewhat mysterious. You still have the DC books trying their best to explain everything to us about this organization. But we did learn early on that they were kind of following the idea of this man known as St. Dumas. Now, with that being said, the whole role of Azrael is to be the angel of vengeance for the actual organization, meaning that if somebody had tried to cross the line when it came to the organization, they would send out their Azrael to make sure that person understands you don't cross the lines with the actual order. Now, when it comes to John Paul, he was not the original Azrael. Really, his father had the mantle at first. Now, his father was not the first, but he was the previous Azrael. But his father made sure that his son, John Paul, would be ready to become the next Azrael by installing the system into his mind. Now, we had learned that technically the system gives him the ability to be up to par when it comes to being the next Azrael, meaning that he has all the fighting skills he needs to be the perfect fighter to go up against his enemies. And so for John Paul, after his dad was, killed off as Azrael, the system was activated. And with the system, well, just like that, he knew everything about the order to a certain point. But also, he had all the fighting skills he needed to make sure to become a good Azrael. Now, right after he did become Azrael, well, Bruce Wayne found him. And Bruce said, hey, you know what? How about this? Don't be an angel of vengeance, but join the Bat family and have a better purpose in life. And that kind of led down the whole path of him becoming the next Batman. And so as we dive into Batman issue number 501, we do pick up with John Paul Valley being confronted by another vision of Saint Dumas, the actual patron that the Order actually believes in, they actually follow. Now for John Paul Valley, he cannot believe that he's being confronted by the actual Saint Dumas, who's telling him like, hey, I want you to no longer be the assassin for the Order. Instead, I kind of want you to be the protector of this city. It's really more of Saint Dumas saying, I need you to prove to me that you actually deserve the role of Batman, to be the actual protector of Gotham. Now for John Paul, he's kind of wondering, wait a second, is this actually Saint Dumas coming to me, or possibly a side effect of the system that was implanted in my mind by my father? Either way, you have John Paul saying, if Saint Dumas came to me, that means I have something to do. But now we have to jump over to Don McCanty. Now, Don is one of the many crime bosses in Gotham City. You see, with Batman being able to take down Bane, it kind of left the door open for all these different crime families to try to take over Gotham completely. And so we see Don McCanty meeting go with some of his men at his restaurant after hours. Now, for McCanty, he kind of believes that his rival, Santos Verona, is not going to try to make a move at all. Except he does. He does send over 2 hitmen to actually take out Mercanti. Now, luckily for Mercanti, Batman was nearby, and he actually saw the 2 guys break into the restaurant. And so you have Batman being able to protect Mercanti, but also take down the hitmen from Verona's group. Now, here's the big catch, though. You see, for John Paul, he kind of believes that he can use Mercanti as an inside man to kind of gather information about the other crime bosses. Now, for John Paul being Batman, he's kind of more aggressive, saying like, hey, listen, you are going to be my inside man. And if you try to betray me, just know I know that you are married, which means that if you try to betray me, well, I will then go after your wife. And something else we have to remember, that when it comes to John Paul, he's not really trying to work with other heroes in Gotham City, like Tim Drake, who is the current Robin around his time in DC Comics. Because for John Paul, kids just get in the way. Other people get in the way on his mission when it comes to protecting Gotham. And so when you have Tim being able to break back into the Batcave, because this man made sure to seal up all other ways into the Batcave except for one, you have Tim once again trying to explain what the role of Batman truly is, because he sees John Paul kind of slipping and not being the Batman of Bruce Wayne, but his own kind of Batman, a more aggressive Batman who's not afraid to cross the line and possibly kill people if it comes down to it. But John Paul's not trying to listen. Now, you have John Paul meet up with Jim Gordon. Now, while you have the 2 characters meeting, we're kind of reestablishing the whole idea that these 2 characters are not on the same page with one another. Now, for Jim Gordon, he has no idea that this is not Bruce Wayne. He still believes it's the same Batman, not knowing it is a new Batman inside the bat suit. And so for Jim, he kind of like, you know what? Batman has gone through a lot when it comes to Bane, and so he may be a tad bit rougher around the edges. But that's kind of his excuse for Batman. But not knowing that it's really John Paul, and John Paul is just more aggressive than Bruce Wayne was. Either way, you do have Jim kind of explain like, hey, we found those guys you left behind at the last crime scene, and they got pretty beat up by you. can you calm down? And for John Paul's like, no, like my ways are more effective than Bruce Wayne's ways. But I want to jump back over to Mercanti because you have Mercanti meeting up with other leaders of crime families in Gotham City. And you have the three guys basically talking about what to do with the other crime families, but also Batman, because the other two are finding out that Mercanti was, kind of pushing to the idea of being a spy for Batman. But he tells the other two families, like, no, I'm not going to be a spy for Batman. Instead, I am going to double cross Batman. Now, we already know that is a bad idea, but he wants to try to get rid of Batman. And so he tells the other two guys, I hired an assassin to bring down the Bat. Now, this assassin comes from the idea of a group called the Agency. Now, the Agency was like this top secret group where if you were part of some kind of government or huge crime family, and back in the 60s, you could hire them to send over an assassin to take care of your problems. The problem was the agency got exposed by different government groups around the world, especially by Congress here in America. And so they were kind of forced to shut down, except one guy found out that the agency had some kind of drug experiment going on, where with the drugs you could brainwash someone into believing in some kind of idea, some kind of purpose in life. And so this guy believed to use the drugs on himself to brainwash himself to make himself the perfect assassin, but to also believe that he's some kind of crusade for some kind of big mission for a hidden group, even though that hidden group is no longer around. And so he was able to do the experiment on himself, and it actually worked out. And he became a perfect assassin for hire, $1 million per contract. And his name is Mekros. And so you're going to have the crime families of these three guys use Mekros as a way to take out Batman and possibly other crime families as well. Now, for the other two crime families who were there at that meeting alongside with Mercanti, they don't really believe that Mekros is worth the money. $1 million to kill off Batman, but you have Mekros kind of say, listen, I'll kill off one of the crime families that has been coming after you guys to kind of show you that I am worth the money. And so just like that, he goes over to the home of that crime family and kill every single person there. The boss and all the guys who were there trying to protect their boss. And so it's kind of like, hey, he is worth the money, but now his goal is to go after Batman. Now, Batman hears the massacre that happened to the other crime family by the hand of Mekros. I want to say it's Mekros, not Mekros. So unfortunately, I'm going to change his name. I couldn't find it anywhere online on how to pronounce it. So guys, forgive me. Either way, you do have Batman hear about the massacre of Mekros. And so he heads over to Mercanti, still believing that Mercanti is his spy. But in reality, Mercanti is not his spy. And Mercanti says, I don't know anything about it. Now, while you have the two guys talking, well, you have Mekros trying to take a sniper shot at Batman. Now, Batman was able to get out of the way just in time, but unfortunately, Mercanti got shot and killed. But now we have to focus on the battle between Batman and also Mekros. And so now we jump into Batman number 502. So we do see Batman fighting against Mekros. Now their battle is a very short-lived battle, and the only reason why, because at first Batman has nowhere else to go, because if he tries to move somewhere, well, with Mekros having a sniper, he could easily snipe Batman in one single shot. Now, luckily for Batman, he does have a way out by using a light to trick Mekros, and then being able to sneak up on behind Mekros to kind of do battle against him. Now, like I said though, the battle is short-lived, and you have the two guys go their separate ways. But before you have the guys go their separate ways, you didn't have Batman say one thing to kind of put doubt in the mind of Mekros by saying, hey, listen, the guys who hired you, they were not really going to pay you. Really, they were going to kill you after you had killed me. Now, that is not technically true, but for Batman, it's a way to figure out who were the other members of the group that had hired Metcross to come after him to hopefully bring them down. Now we jump over to the FBI headquarters where you have these two agents freaking out. And the reason why, because word has gotten out that Metcross has been reactivated. And they have worked very hard to make sure that him being out there would not be well known to the public. And so you have the FBI say, listen, we know he's in Gotham, so go ahead and send out Skyler to go ahead and take care of Metcross. Skyler should be able to handle this kind of job. But now we have to jump over to the other two crime bosses who are left. Now, these two crime bosses, they are talking about what to do with Metcross because one of them believes that he had killed off Mercanti on purpose, even though we know it was an accident. And the other one believes it is an accident and wants to pay Metcross double to make sure that Batman goes down. But the problem is, while these two guys are talking, Metcross walks in. He's all like, no, I'm going to go ahead and kill every person in this building right now. Because Batman had put the idea of doubt in his mind, this man truly believed that he was going to be betrayed by the crime bosses who hired him. But in reality, he wasn't. And so he does kill off almost every single person in this building except for one. And the last one who's alive is able to give Batman all the information he needs to know about what exactly is going down. The whole idea that they hired Metcross to go after Batman. Now, I want to jump over to Jim Gordon because you have Jim talking to Sarah, his wife. Now, this is Jim still trying to understand what happened to Batman? Because, like I said, the man changed. He's not how he used to be because, well, it's no longer Bruce Wayne. It's now John Paul Valley, who's more aggressive than Bruce Wayne was. And so for Jim, he's trying to figure out what exactly happened to Batman. Now, for Sarah, it's more of like, hey, things have changed. Gotham has changed. But on top of that, they get a phone call. And this phone call, it kind of goes the idea of how Batman has changed. Because that phone call is the mayor telling Jim, hey, I need you to come over to my office. We have some things to discuss. And that one thing really is that it's the Batman. And really, it's the mayor telling Jim Gordon, like, the public for Gotham City is kind of divided, where you have half of the city kind of down with the idea of what Batman has done for the city, because technically, Gotham has become safer because, well, John Paul's not playing around. You get one free champion criminal, but you try a second time, you might get killed off. And so Gotham's crime rate has dropped down a lot, but the other half of Gotham is not really liking the idea of Batman being around. And so you have the mayor saying, listen, I need you as the head of the GCPD to kind of get your stuff together because right now I need your police department to get the same results as Batman's getting right now when it comes to taking down criminals. If you can't do that, I'm telling you right now, Jim, you might need to find a new job. Now, really, the ending of this book does wrap up very quickly because you do have Skyler, who's working for the FBI, being able to find Metcross. And of course, he tries to bring him down, but you didn't have Batman get involved as well. Skyler is easily taken down, but you didn't have Batman go after Metcross. Now, those two characters, they do go back and forth for a while, but their battle truly ends when you have Metcross being hung from a meat hook. He's alive, but it kind of shows that John Paul's not playing around. And really, Metcross was on the verge of being sent back home in a body bag. And so we're going to end What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we are going to continue our coverage over Knightquest, but now we have reached a point where it's time for John Paul Valley to meet, well, Catwoman. Now, as we all know, around this time in DC Comics, Bruce Wayne was no longer Batman thanks to Nightfall, thanks to Bane breaking the back of the Bat. And so because of that, it led to John Paul becoming the next Batman. Now, John Paul has become more violent than Bruce Wayne was when he was Batman. And really, when it comes to the different criminals in Gotham, they're kind of scared to do anything at all because of how aggressive John Paul has become. But now it's time for him to meet Catwoman. And how will their first meeting actually go between one another? And so to get into today's story, we have to jump over to Batman issue number 503. Now, the opening pages of this book, we actually see John Paul Valley watching Catwoman leave a warehouse. Now, for John Paul, let's not forget that he has only been Batman for like maybe a few months, and that is really it. So he's still kind of learning about the different characters in Gotham City. But he has heard about her, but he does not know everything about her just yet. But just kind of like Bruce Wayne, for John Paul, something about the way Selina Kyle moves, the way she walks, the way she leaves the warehouse, he is instantly falling in love with her. He begins to think about different things he wants to do well with her. Now, for John Paul, he does not chase her down. Matter of fact, he just leaves to go back to the Batcave to continue to think more about Catwoman. But while you have, John Paul Valley in the Batcave still thinking about Catwoman, well, he realized the bat signal has gone off, which means that Jim Gordon is summoning John Paul over to the GCPD building. Now, let's not forget, for Jim Gordon, he has no idea that, there's a new Batman in town. He still believes it's Bruce Wayne in the bat suit. He kind of knows there's something different about Batman, but honestly, he can't put his finger on it just yet. Now, the reason why Jim had called John Paul over to the GCPD building is because, well, he got word that a neurotoxin has been stolen from a nearby warehouse, the same warehouse that Selina Kyle had run away from earlier in this chapter. Now, for Batman, he's kind of wondering, why in the world would Selina Kyle steal a huge amount of neurotoxin that is also called Zyklon C? And I really hope I pronounced that word correctly. Now, here's the reason why Jim is so concerned about the idea the neurotoxin has been stolen. Because in Gotham, there's going to be a huge summit. A bunch of people coming together to discuss different things around the world. And with that being said, you have people kind of fear that there might be a big, huge terrorist attack at that summit and possibly be using the Zyklon C. Now, for Jim, it does not make sense that Selina Kyle would steal something to kill somebody because she's not a killer. She's a thief, but not a killer. But for John Paul, he's still learning more about Selina Kyle. And so for him, he's kind of like, no, I'm sorry, Jim, but I saw her leave the warehouse and most likely she's the one who has stolen it, which means she's planning to do a terrorist attack, which means I have to stop her. It's John Paul not listening to Jim Gordon. Now, after their meeting, you do have Harvey Bullock come over to Jim Gordon and say, hey man, the mayor wants to talk to you. And this is kind of reminding us that right now, the mayor is trying his best to, well, for me, get reelected. Because right now, half the people in Gotham, they truly do believe in Batman. But the other half, they don't like the idea of having a vigilante in Gotham who's doing the cops' work. But at the same time, for the mayor, he realized that Batman is more effective when it comes to taking down criminals across Gotham City. And so you have the mayor asking Jim like, hey, listen, we got word in the possibility there could be another terrorist attack in Gotham, but this time at the summit. Please tell me you got Batman on the case. And you do have Jim tell the mayor like, yeah, man, I got him on the case and hopefully he'll be able to save the day. Now, once you have John Paul being able to go back to the Batcave, you have John Paul begin to think more about Bruce Wayne. Here's the reason why. Because he's wondering, why didn't Bruce Wayne stop Selina in the past like he did when it comes to other criminals in Gotham City? Now, for John Paul, he also realized that for Selina Kyle to use the neurotoxin, she needs another chemical to actually make it active. And so once she's able to actually find that other chemical, well, then the neurotoxin can be used at the summit. And so for John Paul, his goal is to figure out where is that other chemical and be there just in time to hopefully stop Selina. Now, the next section really shows that John Paul could possibly be a great Batman, even though he is somewhat aggressive. And here's the reason why I'm saying that, because you have John Paul being able to figure out which warehouse is holding the second chemical, but he's also able to figure out that there are 3 different access points that Selina Kyle can take to enter the actual warehouse. But he also knows that he can't be there all 3 spots to watch them to make sure to get the jump on Selina. And so he had set up some devices, kind of like sensors, to kind of tell him like, hey, she came in this part right here, so you should go that way if you want to cut her off or get the jump on her. And so while you have John Paul inside the Batmobile, one of the sensors do go off and say, hey, she's coming in through this access point. And for John Paul, it's perfect because now he is able to get the jump on her. And now it leads into their first actual meeting. Now, their first meeting does not go in the way you think it would because you have John Paul still being so aggressive. Now, with them being aggressive, it kind of tells Selina Kyle that this is not the same Batman that she has known for many years. Matter of fact, she can tell this is a different Batman because automatically you have John Paul say, hey, listen, I know that you are trying to pull off some kind of terrorist attack. Now for Selina, she's like, wait a second. I know Batman. He would not just jump to conclusions without actually trying to talk to me first. But here's John Paul just going ahead and jumping to conclusions, believing that she is trying to pull off some kind of terrorist attack. But she tells us, the readers in Batman, that yes, she did steal the Zyklon C, but the main goal was to keep it away from terrorists. But also, she's now trying to find a different chemical that could kind of replace the other one that could make Zyklon C go active. Now, before she's able to kind of explain more about her plans, you have John Paul just go ahead and begin to get the jump on her, trying to fight against her. But this battle really tells Selina that this is not her Batman. This is not Bruce Wayne. But after a few pages of these two characters fighting against each other, you do have Selina being able to actually get away. But of course, John Paul is not done with her just yet. Now, as we jump into Batman issue number 504, we do kind of pick up where the last chapter left off at, but something else also happens. Let me explain. So, for John Paul Valley, before he became Batman, he was known as Azrael, and he was part of a group called the Order of Saint Dumas, where you had the actual order kind of follow the guidelines of one of the saints better known as Saint Dumas. Now, when it came to John Paul, his father was I don't want to say the original Azrael, but he was the one before John Paul was. Now, when it came to his father, he wanted to make sure that his son would be ready to take over the actual role. And so he built the system. Now, the system was implanted into the mind of John Paul to kind of make sure that John Paul would be ready to take up the mantle of Azrael when the time had come. And so for John Paul, when his dad died, which meant that John Paul had to take up the mantle, John Paul knew how to fight. John Paul knew most of the secrets about the Order of Saint Dumas. Not all, but most of it. Now, Azrael is a role in the Order of Saint Dumas, and it's better known as their avenging angel, meaning that if somebody tries to cross the line with the Order, they sent out their avenging angel, and that would be, well, Azrael. Now, for John Paul, recently, thanks to the system, he has begun to see the actual Saint Dumas. Now, with them seeing the actual Saint Dumas in his mind, you do have Saint Dumas trying his best to talk to John Paul, trying to give him an actual life mission. Now, the life mission does change back and forth, where sometimes it's him saying like, hey, you know what? I don't like the idea of you becoming the Batman and trying to take up a new mantle. But then sometimes you have the actual Saint Dumas pantheon coming to John Paul saying, no, you have taken up a great role becoming the Batman to help protect the city from darkness. And so currently we're seeing him kind of talking to Saint Dumas, and once again the actual mission changes again. Now, it's a very short period of time because the only reason why he does appear is because it's John Paul still kind of thinking about his mission, but also kind of wondering more about Catwoman and kind of hoping that Saint Dumas can kind of guide him on what to do when it comes to Selina Kyle. But either way, as we jump into this chapter, he does continue to try to chase her down over to a boat. Now, this leads into another battle between these two characters where you actually have Batman trying to bring her in, but at the same time, Selina Kyle sees him and she puts the boat in drive, and the boat is just heading towards another part of the actual pier. Now, here's the problem though. You see, it's Batman once again not trying to listen to Selina Kyle. She's trying to explain to him that she's not actually trying to, steal the toxin and use the toxin. She's trying to be a good person, and she's trying to explain what her actual plan is. But the problem is, Batman is not listening. And so for Selina, she knows she has to go ahead and dip the heck out of here. And so she grabbed the container that's currently holding the chemical she tried to steal earlier, and she jumps off the boat. Now, Batman was able to jump off the boat as well, but for him, it was at the very last minute. And the boat does crash into another part of the pier, which does cause a small explosion, which does catch the eyes of innocent people who were nearby, and of course they call in the GCPD. Now, for Batman, he does continue to try to chase after Selina Kyle, and really, the chase goes all over Gotham City, over to a tower called Tuscany Tower. Now, when they do arrive inside the tower and their battle continues, a gargoyle does fall out of the window and crashes right on top of Renee Montoya's car. And as you know, she does work for the GCPD right under Jim Gordon. And so once that happens, she's all like, hey, Jim, hey, Harvey, I think Batman and Catwoman are currently fighting inside that building. And so as the battle continues on, you have the police trying to get up to the top of the tower. Now for Batman, he kind of does realize that this battle might go to the actual death because neither side is trying to give up so easily. Each person is going for the final strike. Now, as their battle goes on, you then have, well, the GCPD being able to barge into the room. Now, for Batman, this is perfect because Selina Kyle was still holding on to the container that was holding that chemical, and that container is right near her right now. And so it's John Paul saying, hey, listen, Jim, you wanted proof that Selina Kyle is trying to be a terrorist and use a chemical to kill off innocent people at the next summit. Well, look right over there. There's a container and she was the one holding it. And you have Batman just dip out, leaving Selina to deal with this issue on her own. But now we have to jump over to Catwoman issue number 7, the final chapter for this 3-part story arc, where we actually begin to learn what exactly is going down. Now, the opening pages of this chapter does pick up where the last chapter left off at, but you do have Selina Kyle kind of explain to us about how she was kind of brought into this whole situation. You see, she had met a group of people called the Friends of the Earth Nature Magic Alliance. Yeah, that's their name. It's a very lovely, lovely name. Either way, their big goal is to, protect the environment. But they got word that the next summit, the committee there were actually thinking about using the Zyklon Sea on innocent people and animals in a nearby rainforest to go ahead and remove those people and animals to begin to do some work in the rainforest. And so once they got word, they knew that someone else might try to use the chemicals on the actual committee. Now, when it comes to Catwoman, she also met a guy known as Joe Underhill. Now, Joe Underhill was the person who had actually created the formula. And so it's her telling us like, okay, this is how she got involved, and this is why she's trying her best to make sure that chemical does not fall in the wrong hands. Now, we're going to learn who is trying to use the chemicals here in a moment, but for right now we know how she got involved. But you do have Selina being able to kind of get away from the police while using her friend's tricks to kind of help her out there at the tail end of that scene. But now we have to jump over to two characters, and that would be Marv and Doogie. Now, these two characters are the two guys who are trying to use Zyklon Sea at the actual summit to kill off all the people there. But here comes the big problem. You see, they are currently holding on to the chemical that activates Zyklon Sea, turning it into an actual neurotoxin. The problem is, well, now the GCPD is currently holding on to Zyklon Sea. And so what they're currently holding on to is, basically useless. But then you have one of the guys say, hey, I got an idea. Let's kidnap Dr. Underhill, the friend to Selina Kyle, because if we do that, we can have him recreate more of Zyklon Sea. And once he does that, we can then use our chemical to actually turn it into a neurotoxin to begin the process of killing off the people at the summit. And really, by the next page, we actually see the two guys being able to find Dr. Underhill and knock out the person that was with him, grab Dr. Underhill, and take him away to have him begin to work on the actual chemical so that they can use it on the people at the summit. Now, you do have Selina head over to the GCPD building. Why? To use the bat signal as a way to call up Batman and tell him, hey man, listen, so earlier you believed that I was trying to use the chemical as a way to attack the people at the summit, but you are completely wrong. And so you didn't have Selina go out of her way to kind of explain things to him to what she was trying to do. And so after a few pages where you do have Selina being able to actually convince Batman that one, she's not trying to be a terrorist, but two, she's also trying to be a good guy, she also asked him to actually help out. Like, hey, I need your help to stop this. Can you help me? And you have Batman say yes. So now the two characters are going to work together. Now, this is where you kind of have the book begin to wrap up very quickly. So getting back over to Marv and Doogie, you do have one of the two guys being able to take the new batch of chemicals with them over to the conference, while the other guy stays behind to kill off Dr. Underhill. Now, luckily for the Doctor, he is saved at the very last second from Batman and Catwoman. Now, with those two characters being there, they also kind of realize that maybe they're a tad bit too late when it came to stopping the two guys. So now they have to run over to the actual conference. Now, the book really does end on a good note because we do kind of find out that Dr. Underhill did not actually give the boys the actual toxin. Instead, what he created for them was just tear gas, and that's really it. So for the boys, they believe like, okay, yeah, we got the toxin. Go ahead and head over to the summit right now and release it. But in reality, They don't have anything at all. And so the book really ends with Batman and also Catwoman being able to get there in time to stop the last guy from actually using the gas, even though all he has is just tear gas. But once you have our heroes being able to stop him, you have our heroes go their separate ways. And yeah, that does kind of end today's comic book video. The whole idea of John Paul meeting Catwoman for the first time in DC Comics. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we are going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest, but now it's time for us to get into, well, a three-part story arc where we are going to have the Joker going up against the Batman. Now remember, by this point in Batman comics, Bruce Wayne is no longer the Batman. Instead, it is actually John Paul Valley. And John Paul Valley has not had a run-in yet with the Joker up until this moment right here, where you have the Joker coming back to Gotham to hopefully take down the Batman. But the Joker has no idea just yet that the Batman that he has been fighting for so many years is no longer around. That instead is now a new Batman, and he has to learn it the hard way. Now, for the Joker, we already know that every single time this man tries to go after the Batman, he tries to go after Batman in very unique ways. And so this time, it's the Joker trying to, well, kill off the Batman, but make it a movie. You see, we see the Joker meeting up with a movie producer known as Barry Zedmore. And you do have the Joker show him a test reel of his new production, a new movie called The Death of Batman. Now, once you have Barry actually watch the film, the test run, you have Barry be very excited in what he was seeing. And so he agrees to give Joker the money he needs to make this movie, not realizing that the Joker is really trying to make a movie about the death of the Batman, where the actual death scene will actually be real. Either way, once you have Barry agree with Joker to kind of give some money to get this movie started, you then have the Joker leave to go find his lead actor. And we already know that would be John Paul Valley Batman. Now, as we jump over to John Paul Valley being Batman, we do get reminded that after you had John Paul become Batman, we did see him become a more aggressive Batman than Bruce Wayne. Now, with that aggressiveness, he was able to make Gotham a safer place for the innocent people of Gotham. And so you are now technically able to go out and worry a tad bit less about being robbed or possibly murdered, because most of the criminals are kind of scared to come out because what Batman did to Bane, but other criminals after Bane who tried to make their moves. Now, with all that information, we do see Batman just hanging around the city, but then he hears a young woman scream for help. Now, when he goes to help her, he realizes that she's being attacked by men who are criminals, but they're dressed like different creatures of the night. So, for example, you have one of the creatures dressed like Frankenstein, or the werewolf, or for example, Dracula. Now, you do have Batman being able to take these three guys down very easily, and they do run away. Now, when he goes to check up on the woman, she's very happy to see him, but then she passes out. Now, she's going to be very important because this is the Joker trying to use her as a way to get to Batman, because every hero has that woman that he easily falls in love with, that he tries to get close to. And so for the Joker, this whole idea of the death of Batman may be a movie, but also be a real thing. But he wants to make sure all the different parts of his movie actually happens. So Batman, the main person in the movie, must have a love interest. Now, Batman was able to figure out where the young woman stays at, and apparently at a university. Her name is Cindy Brooks. Now, Cindy Brooks is only going to be really important for this story arc alone when it comes to Knightquest. But after he was able to figure out where she lived, he took her back home. And once she does confirm that she is okay, he is out of there in a hurry. But when he was in her room, it kind of reminded him when he was young, back in college, having a dorm room, being able to live free and wild without any kind of serious things to worry about. And so it kind of begins the process of John Paul slowly begin to think more about her and possibly trying to get with her. But shifting our focus back over to the Joker, you have the Joker head back over to the studio that had approved to produce his movie, The Death of the Batman. Now, we do learn that the Joker staff is really more just different people that he hired to be his henchmen to kind of help out with the movie, but also the big plan to kill off Batman. Now, two of the guys, they were kind of hired to help the Joker go over different opinions about his movie. Like, for example, the Batman being different. You see, the Joker was able to realize that Batman is no longer wearing his classic outfit, that now he has his new armor suit on. Now, for the Joker, it does not ring any bells that there could be a possibility of someone else being in the bat suit. It still could be the one he fought for many years. It's that now he had changed his outfit. We see the two guys kind of argue about what they think about the outfit. And for me personally, it's kind of like these two guys being used to represent how the fans felt back in the 1990s when it came to Bruce Wayne no longer being Batman and John Paul being Batman, and John Paul wearing the new Batman suit. Either way, we also learned that the Joker had locked up the producer of the movie and his entire staff in cells underneath the studio. Now, the main producer of the movie, he still believes that the Joker is really going to help out his company with this movie, and also the Joker is going to bring a blockbuster movie. Now, his assistant is trying to tell him like, no, the Joker is using you and your money, and also he's really going to kill off the Batman. Like, we should be very worried here. Now, I want to jump back over to John Paul, and this is where we're going to have a quick chat about the system that was installed in the mind of John Paul Valley. And I know, like every single video we do for Knightquest, I have this conversation, but it's really important for the character of John Paul. Now, we had learned a while back that John Paul Valley belongs to a group called the Order of St. Dumas. Now, the Order of St. Dumas had followed a saint better known as St. Dumas all the way back in the 14th, 15th century. Now, over the years, the order was able to stay around, but anytime somebody would try to cross the order in a negative way, they would send someone out to kill you, their avenging angel, better known as Azrael. Now, when it came to John Paul Valley, he had no idea that he was technically part of the Order of St. Dumas. But his father, the previous Azrael, was the one going around that time being the avenging angel. But the problem was his father wanted to make sure that his son would be ready to take up the mantle just in case anything happened. And that was called the system. The system was installed in the mind of John Paul so that when the time comes and it has to be activated, John Paul would know everything about the order, but also be a very well-trained fighter. And so when John Paul's father had died, it was time for John Paul to become Azrael. But around that time, John Paul met Bruce Wayne, and Bruce said, hey, why don't you just, come over to our side, the Bat family, and be a better person, not an actual killer for the Order of St. Dumas. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, because for John Paul, the last few videos, every once in a while, he is confronted by the Pantheon St. Dumas in some kind of vision, where you have St. Dumas trying to tell him that his main goal currently is to save the Dark City, to make the Dark City a better place. And he's talking about Gotham City. Now, the problem is for this story arc is that John Paul kind of feels like it's a never-ending crusade. Like he'll never be able to actually save Gotham because how corrupt Gotham truly is. And also, it's John Paul kind of thinking about that young girl, but also the life he had before he became Azrael, before becoming Batman, or even joining the Order of Saint Dumas, when his life was very peaceful and quiet. And so it's kind of like John Paul trying to move away from the life of being part of the Order of Saint Dumas, but also this crusade to save the Dark City. Now, for the Joker, because he's all in this whole idea that he's trying to make a movie, that he believes that the Batman needs some motivation. And so, for the Joker, we see him tell his camera crew that they're going to head over to the university that Cindy stays at because, hey, we have an idea that could possibly motivate the Batman to kind of work through the Joker's movie a tad bit better. Now, getting back over to John Paul, you have John Paul going out at night to figure out what was going on with those three guys dressed as movie characters. He's trying to figure out if possibly there's a new game trying to come in and do some new kind of game work in Gotham City, but dressed as movie characters. Now, he's at the university that Cindy stays at. And so while being there, he sees a small explosion. He goes over there and he's then confronted by even more movie characters. Now, for Batman, he has to take them down. But while doing that, he realized that two of them are trying to get away through a different exit, and he follows. But then he learns that this was actually a setup because it's the Joker kind of leaving clues behind to tell him that one, it's the Joker, but two, this is some kind of sick joke to say that Batman might be in a movie. But he also realized that Cindy was a pawn being used as a way to lure Batman into this trap or into a future trap down the road. Now, for John Paul, he begins to get very worried for Cindy because he's at the university while all of this is happening at the moment. And so he runs over to her dorm room, except when he does, he sees somebody being thrown out the window. And it seems to be Robin. Tim Drake Robin. And so now we have to jump into Detective Comics issue number 672, the next chapter of this whole event. Now, with that being said, we do see Batman being able to save Robin. Now, we should have known that this would not be Robin. Here's the reason why. Because around this time in DC Comics, DC had launched the Robin solo series. Tim Drake was by himself because with Bruce Wayne being gone, and for John Paul, he felt like he did not needed a Robin at all. You had Tim Drake go solo into protecting Gotham and going on his own adventures. And so getting back over to John Paul, once he was able to actually save the Robin, we kind of find out it is actually Cindy. And really, for the Joker, Batman was not supposed to save her at all because he was trying to motivate him. With the death of Cindy, it would motivate Batman even more for Joker's movie. But the problem is now Batman has saved Cindy. And so it kind of ruined the whole Joker's big plan there. Now, for the Joker, he's not really happy about Batman being able to save the life of Cindy, but also Batman still being the heroic person, meaning that for the Joker, his storyboard is supposed to be Batman dying. The movie is called The Death of Batman. You can't have the death of Batman if Batman keeps surviving at the end of all your storyboard. And so you have the Joker asking the producer Barry for more money. Now, at first, Barry says no. Like, hey, first off, you have me locked up in a cell. Number two, you already got a lot of money from me. I'm not giving you even more money for this movie of yours. But you didn't have the Joker pull out a gun and say, hey, buddy, listen, you sure about that? Like, go ahead and give me the money or I'm going to shoot you. And you have the producer give the Joker more money for this movie that he's trying to pull off. Now, you do have John Paul go back to the Batcave. When he does, he kind of wonders, why hadn't Bruce Wayne dealt with the Joker before? Because it's an endless cycle. You stop the Joker, you give him over to Arkham, he breaks out, he kills people, and the cycle continues over and over again. And so for John Paul, he's kind of wondering, why hadn't Bruce Wayne just stopped the Joker for good? Now, you also have John Paul realize that, well, Tim Drake has been using the Bat computer in secret. And let's not forget, John Paul told Tim, you are no longer allowed in the Bat cave, because to him, he felt like Tim Drake being a Robin for him is not needed. That Tim Drake would always just get in the way with him being Batman. And so he said, you're no longer allowed in the Bat cave, but he finds out that Tim has been, well, using the Bat computer when John Paul is not around. Now, for the Joker, he wants Gotham to know that he is making a big movie, The Death of Batman. And so you have the GCPD get a package, and the package is a brand new movie poster that was actually created by the Joker to tell them and other people in Gotham that, hey, here comes the Joker in his brand new movie, The Death of Batman. And for Jim Gordon, he's kind of freaking out wondering, what is the Joker actually up to? Like, yes, he knows that the Joker wants to kill Batman, but like, a movie though? Now, we do see Jim Gordon go over to the Bat Signal to call up Batman and kind of get a better idea about what in the world is going on with the Joker sending out movie posters about a movie called The Death of Batman. But the problem is, John Paul does not show up when Jim Gordon lights up the Bat Signal. Now, this is also Jim Gordon kind of realizing slowly here that maybe it's not the same Batman that he has always worked with over the years. And really, you have more and more police officers kind of realize that when it came to the battle between Batman and Bane, John Paul and Bane, they realized that Batman was completely different in that battle. He was more aggressive than he ever was in the past. But for Jim, he's kind of like, no, it has to be the same man I always worked with over the years. But it's him slowly learning that's not technically true. Now, we also see John Paul go over to the hospital to check up on Cindy after her incident at the university where she was dressed up as Robin. But then they realize that, well, somebody has signed her out. And for John Paul, he knows it was the Joker. It's the Joker once again coming at Batman. Now, for the Joker, he told everyone, like, hey, listen, the movie poster is going to tell you where the movie is going to take place at the Majestic Theater. Except for Batman, John Paul, he realized that it had to be a trap if he goes there. So he does some good detective work and realize that the Joker's real lair should be at some movie warehouse. So you have Batman go over to that warehouse while you have the GCPD go to investigate the Majestic Theater. Now, when the GCPD arrive, yeah, it was a trap. They get fired upon by a bunch of bullets. But either way, you have Batman, John Paul, being able to go deeper into the movie studio. Now, the Joker knew that Batman would sooner or later figure out that the Majestic Theater is not the actual location, that the Batman would find out where his actual base is at. And so while you have Batman going through the warehouse, you have John Paul going through different scenarios of different kinds of movies that somebody would be in if they were an actor. But by the end of all these different scenarios, you didn't have a bunch of guys beginning to throw pies at Batman. Now you're kind of like, okay, it's pies, so what? But apparently the pies were drugged. And so after a few pies had hit Batman over and over and over again, he was completely knocked out thanks to the pies being drugged. Now, real quick, I want to tell you guys that the police officers at the theater are actually okay. And the reason why, because they find out that it was a turret gun that was set to go off if anybody actually entered the actual building. But the gun ran out of bullets, and so the GCPD are able to kind of realize that this was a fake place to come to. It was a trap. But shifting our focus back over to Batman, we now enter the final scene of the Joker's movie because you didn't have John Paul wake up, but now he's been chained down and unable to actually move. But then he realized that Cindy is being hung upside down and slowly descending into a tank full of water where well, she'll drown. And so this is the Joker kind of like, hey, listen, you have now entered the final scene of my movie. And this leads us into the final chapter of the story arc. And so this leads us into the final chapter of the book. But also, this is the moment where you have the Joker realize this is not his Batman. Like, this is a new Batman. Because once you have John Paul being able to break free from the chain that was bounding him down to the ground, he's able to fight against all the henchmen that the Joker had hired. But in the middle of that battle, well, he started watching Batman and he realized, wait, Batman moves is completely different. It's not so smooth. It's more aggressive, more beast-like. And so you have Joker realize, oh, wait, new suit, more aggressive, not really down with the idea of all my different jokes. Like, this is not my Batman. It's not him. It is a different person. Either way, you have John Paul being able to take down all the henchmen that the Joker had and also save Cindy. Now, after that moment, you didn't have Cindy tell the Batman that she is done. Now, for Batman, he's kind of wondering, what are you talking about? Like, you mean you're done? Like, what is that about? And we learned that she was actually working for the Joker. The Joker hired her to be that damsel in distress as a way to get to Batman, to have someone for him to fall in love with when it comes to his movie. She was not just a random person that he had picked. Like, in reality, no, he picked her, but not by random. He used her for that actual part of his plan. And so for John Paul, he realized that all that time he was worried about her, it kind of moved him away from continuing his crusade to save the Dark City. But now he has to shift his focus back onto the Joker. Now, I want to jump over to Jim Gordon. Here's the reason why. So you had Jim technically at the police station, and he's with his wife, Sarah, who's also a police officer. Now, for Sarah, she never liked the Batman. She hated what he standed for. To her, the whole idea of the Batman is saying the police in Gotham are unable to actually protect the city, which honestly is completely true. But either way, you have her always hating on Batman. Now, for Jim, he never truly did hate the Batman. He's kind of like, listen, at first it was bad blood, but we worked things through, and now we're partners. But she says, hey, haven't you realized that he's changed? He's more aggressive. He's completely different. He's more a silent partner now. He's not really trying to work with you. Like, she goes on. And it's her kind of pushing Jim in the right direction to say, hey, man, that is not the same Batman that you had always worked with over the years. That is somebody else. Now, I want to jump back over to John Paul and also the Joker because it's time for these two characters to actually battle. Now, when these two characters go up against one another, you actually have John Paul being that aggressive person he is. Now, for Joker, even though he realized that this is not the same Batman that he had fought against over the years, he still believes that John Paul is just as what he thinks soft as Bruce Wayne, meaning that John Paul will beat down the Joker, but then hand the Joker over to Arkham, and then the cycle continues all over again. But for John Paul, he's tired of the cycle. He says, no, I'm going to break the cycle. And so you have John Paul really going at it on the Joker. Like, he plans to kill the Joker. But what does save the Joker's life is that the GCPD do arrive just in time to stop him. Like, hey, you are not going to kill that man at all. Now, for me personally, that's a dumb move because this is the Joker. Like, go ahead, kill him off. Gotham will be a better place without the Joker. But because the GCPD has a code to follow, they say, hey, Batman, you are not going to kill him. And for the Joker, he got very lucky because if the GCPD had arrived just maybe 10 seconds later, the Joker would have been dead. Now, different members of the GCPD are also realizing that Batman is not what he used to be. Like, he's, again, more aggressive. He's out there trying to take people down for good if he needs to. He's okay with crossing that line. And so you have the GCPD wondering, what to do with Batman. But the ending of the book is really more the book showing us that the Joker is okay after being beat down by Batman, but while riding over to the hospital in the ambulance, you have the Joker being able to wake up, and I guess his arm is okay, but also break free, and now he's out there again in Gotham and waiting for the right time to bring more chaos into the city. But this Okay, so we have reached a point where we're going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest, but we have to cover a bunch of different one-shots to kind of show John Paul being the Batman of Gotham City. Now, when it comes to Knightquest, there's going to be a point down the road where we're going to shift our focus back over to Bruce Wayne. And it's called Knightquest The Search, where you have Bruce Wayne out there trying his best to find Jack Drake, the father of Tim Drake, and to hopefully bring him back home. And that will actually begin our process of Bruce Wayne coming back into Gotham as we dive into Night Sin, the final part of the Nightfall trilogy. Now, when it comes to Knightquest, like I said, we're going to cover a bunch of one-shots. Today's video is one of those one-shots. We're going to cover Shadow of the Bat, issue number 24, written by Alan Grant. Now, this book to me is not really that bad. Here's the reason why, because it really shows the human side of John Paul Valley while being Batman. Now, if you have seen my coverage over Knightquest, we have seen John Paul kind of dive deeper and deeper into the whole concept of being Batman, being the protector of Gotham City, kind of losing his human side. And so this book right here is one of those stories where it kind of brings John Paul Valley back into reality, hoping to bring back his human side. And really, as we go through today's video, you're going to see what I mean about him bringing out his human side again. And so as we dive into the opening pages for today's video, we actually pick up with a young woman. Now, this young woman is an immigrant, and right now we see her at the dock in Gotham City, walking around with a bag full of money. Now, you do have these thugs realize that, one, she is an immigrant, and two, to them, she's easy picking. And also they realize that she has a bag full of money. And so you have these thugs trying to rob her. Now, luckily for her, Batman is there to save her. Now, like I said earlier, when it comes to John Paul Valley, we have been seeing him in Knightquest becoming more aggressive, kind of leaving behind his human side. And the reason why I'm bringing this up again, because when it comes to John Paul being more aggressive, he's more aggressive than Bruce Wayne was. And so most of the criminals in Gotham City, they're very scared of Batman. When they see him, they freak out instantly because they know this man is going to beat them down. And really, for the thugs, they're kind of hoping like, hey, we didn't rob her. Please leave us alone. You have John Paul say, no, I am going to use you as an example like I did to other people in the past when you crossed that line. And so he beats them down. Now, once you have Batman being able to actually save the young woman, you do have Batman asking her like, hey, what in the world are you doing out here in the middle of the night? Now, Batman, he was able to realize that she is speaking Spanish. And with John Paul being able to know Spanish, he's able to communicate with her. Now, she does tell us that she came to Gotham looking to get her baby back. Now, we do learn that her name is Rosemary. Now, we're not really told what country she came from, but we are told that around this time, there was a civil war happening in her country. And the reason why I'm bringing that up, because the guerrillas who took part of the Civil War, they would tax the food that came from Rosemary's village. And because of that, that village barely had any food left to survive. Now, when it came to her husband and her, they had 5 children to feed. But the big problem was Raul, her husband, was arrested by the government for supposedly helping out the guerrillas when it came to the Civil War. And so, with her husband no longer being around, it got really hard for her to feed all of her children. And she felt like the only way to actually save her family was to free her husband from jail, but she had to pay for his releasement. And so she realized the only way to do that was to sell her baby. Now, she does ask for John Paul's help, but he says no. And the reason why, because to him, she is a criminal. You sold your baby away to just get some money to hopefully get your husband out of jail to what? Save your family? And so he walks away. Now, for Rosemary, she snaps. She said, "What kind of person are you? You see a mother right now trying her best to get her son back, and you're not willing to help out? Did you ever have a mother in your life who would do anything for you, do anything to get you back?" And so for John Paul, he realized that he's kind of losing his human side because now he begins to think about his mother. But now we have to jump over to Jim Gordon. Now, really, this plot line is not really important, but hey, you know what? Let's go ahead and talk about it. So, for Jim Gordon, he's trying to prove that this random guy that he had arrested had killed off his wife. The problem is, every single time they give him a polygraph, it shows that he is not lying when he says, "Hey, I didn't kill her. It must have been somebody else." But for Jim Gordon, he knows that it was the husband who had killed off his wife. But the problem is he's having a hard time proving that. And so now he thinks he has to call in Batman to help out. But now we jump back over to Rosemary to kind of continue to learn more about that character. And we do learn that for Rosemary, when it came to her giving up her child, she only got $50 for her child in American money. Now, that kind of money in that country can go a long way. And matter of fact, she planned on using that money to get her husband out of jail. Now, for Rosemary, she had no idea that she had just given up her child over to a, well, human trafficking ring that runs out of Gotham. Matter of fact, when she asked them, like, "Hey, where's my child going?" they tell her, "Oh, your child's going to California and going to have rich parents." Instead, that child, her baby, was sent over to Gotham City. Now, the only reason why she was able to learn where her child went because one of her other kids overheard where those people were taking their sibling to, Gotham City. Now, for John Paul, he does stop by the GCPD to kind of answer the call of Jim Gordon. Now, that is when you have John Paul inform Jim Gordon what is happening with Rosemary. Now, for Batman, it kind of seems like he might not really help out Rosemary as he tells Jim, like, "Hey, I might hand her over to you to kind of handle her problem." You didn't have Jim ask John Paul for advice to kind of prove how the husband had actually killed off his wife, because almost every single test they give to the husband, he is able to prove that he's actually innocent. And you didn't have Batman say, "Listen, when it comes to that husband, most likely he's using hypnosis as a way to kind of trick himself to make sure that he believes completely that he did not kill his wife." But in reality, he did. And so once you have Jim Gordon realize that his new suspect has been using hypnosis as a way to trick his own mind, to trick the polygraph, you have Jim thanks Batman, and for Jim, he kind of knows that he had what he needs to bring down his suspect. Now, for Rosemary, do learn that once she had the money to go free her husband, apparently she finds out that her husband was killed off. And the reason why, because him and two other people were trying to escape. Unfortunately, they were all killed and buried. And so you have, I guess, the guard at the prison hand her husband's death certificate to prove that he was killed off. And so she sold her child to get that money, to get her husband, and basically now she can't. But now we jump into the ending of the book, where really we can kind of wrap everything up in this last section right here, because you have John Paul begin to do some detective work to kind of figure out how to bring down the entire human trafficking ring in Gotham City. or really child trafficking ring. And so you have John Paul going out of his way to do some detective work. And really, I kind of like this because when it comes to John Paul, he's not really big into, well, doing detective work. If he's working on a case, he kind of wishes that everything was laid out for him so that he can go ahead and take down the people he needs to take down. But in this case, he has to do some detective work to figure out who is behind this actual ring. And so after a few pages, he was able to learn who was behind the entire ring. Now, it is a bunch of different characters that we don't really need to care about. Just know that these guys are easily taken out by Batman. And so with him being able to take them all out, just like that, Batman was able to shut down this ring going on in Gotham City. But also, it kind of shows that John Paul realized that he did this because these kids need parents. These kids need their mother, need their father. And for John Paul, he lost his mom. He lost his father. And so he wants to make sure that those kids do not go through the same thing, kind of bringing out his human side. But either way, what's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we are going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest. But unfortunately, we have reached a point where Knightquest got a tad bit confusing. And let me explain. So, when it came to Batman Nightfall, DC did an amazing job to make sure that, well, Nightfall was told in a proper order so that fans can actually enjoy it. So you had all the different Bat titles work together to tell the story of Nightfall. Night Quest, not really. You see, Night Quest has a story, but the problem is all the different parts of the stories would come out at once on different weeks. So sometimes you might get part 2, part 9, and part 11, or part 3, part 8, and part 12 in 1 week. And it could get a tad bit confusing because there were a lot of bad titles being used to tell the story of Nightfall. Like, of course, Batman, Detective Comics, Shadow of the Bat, and also like Catwoman, Robin, and the list goes on. And so with all those different books being out there, it kind of got a tad bit confusing to know what is the actual reading order when it comes to Batman Knightquest. And so that is why we're at a point where we have to cover a bunch of one-shot story arcs because it gets a tad bit confusing. And so that is why we're only talking about Batman number 505 for today's video. Now, the opening pages of this book, we actually pick up with Batman doing some detective work. John Paul Valley arrived at a crime scene where an entire family had just been killed off. And the question is right now, who had done it? Now, for John Paul, he can tell it has to be a family member. But before he is actually able to sit down and do some detective work, that is when the system is activated. Now, we had actually talked about the system before. You see, the system is this thing that was put in his mind by his father, the previous Azrael. Let me explain. You see, in John Paul Valley's timeline, he was Azrael before he became Batman. But before he was actually able to pick up the mantle of Azrael, his father was Azrael. But his father knew that sooner or later, one day down the road, his son, John Paul, would have to take up the mantle of the Avenging Angel. Now, once you're in the role of Azrael, you're usually part of the Order of St. Dumas. Now, the actual order, they do their job to kind of follow the order of St. Dumas from the 14th, 15th century. Now, anytime somebody would actually cross the lines with the actual order, they sent out their avenging angel, better known as Azrael. And like I said earlier, before John Paul, it was his father. Now, when his father died, we had learned that he had implanted something called the system in the mind of John Paul Valley. Now, the system is technically used to make sure that if John Paul had become Azrael, he would be ready. The system would teach John Paul all of the moves he needs to know to be a great fighter, but also teach him everything he needs to know about the actual order of St. Dumas. The problem is that now sometimes with the system, he might see different images or pantheons trying to talk to him. And really, in the earlier chapters of Knightquest, he would have conversations with, well, of course, St. Dumas. But in the opening pages of this book, this time, it is his father. Now, really, it's his father kind of saying, like, you have stepped away from the actual role that you were supposed to be, which was Azrael. But as soon as you took up that mantle, you met Bruce Wayne and tried to live a different life. And now you are trying to take up a different mantle, which is Batman. And son, I don't want that for you. Instead, I want you to take up the actual mantle that I left behind for you, Azrael. But while you have the spirit of his father talking to him, well, that is when he's also being confronted by the spirit of St. Dumas. Now, for St. Dumas, he's saying, listen, I put your son on this new path. I want your son to actually save the Dark City. And of course, he is talking about Gotham City. But for John Paul Valley's father, it's completely wrong. Because to his father, he's kind of like, why would St. Dumas want his avenging angel now being this bad character to save this city that's already falling apart? And so you actually had the two spirits fight against each other for the control and mind of John Paul Valley, where you actually do have the St. Dumas being able to get rid of the spirit of John Paul Valley's father to kind of show him like, no, I am the only true spirit here in your mind, in the system. And right now I'm telling you, I want you to be Batman. Now, with the sirens of police coming towards the crime scene, it wakes up John Paul Valley and he leaves. But now he has to do some detective work to figure out who killed off this entire family. Now, we are introduced to the actual bad guy for today's video, and that'll be a character known as Arbitrary. Now, Arbitrary is actually a very interesting bad guy who first appeared back in Detective Comics issue number 625 in the year 1991. Now, for Arbitrary, his real name is Arnold Etchison. Now, for Arnold, like I said, a very interesting bad guy, this man believed that his entire family was evil. And so he began to go on a killing spree by killing off every single member of his family, his father, mother, wife, kids, or even like uncles and aunts and grandparents. Like, he didn't care. If they were his family member, they had to die. And so we're kind of being told here that the entire family we saw earlier that was killed off, that John Paul found, had to be done by him. They were his family and he killed them off. And so now we are able to jump over to John Paul Valley. Now, when we do, we are basically seeing John Paul Valley be a detective. And this is really important for the character when it comes to Knightquest, because for Knightquest, you have John Paul kind of decide that he'll be his own Batman and not try to be how Bruce Wayne was. And really, we kind of saw that when it comes to John Paul, because he wanted to make sure that when he was out there being Batman, he was going to make a statement that the idea that if you were going to be out in Gotham trying to commit a crime, he'll make sure you regret making that crime happen in Gotham City. But then you realize that there are some cases out there you have to be a detective, that the whole idea of brute force is not going to help you solve all the problems you need to solve in Gotham. Sometimes you gotta do detective work. And so you have John Paul being able to figure out who was behind the actual killing of the entire family. And of course, it would be Arnold. Now, for John Paul Valley, he has to remember that the whole idea of Arnold is that he believes that his entire family is evil, which means that he'll go after different family members to kill them off. And so after doing some detective work, he realized that Arnold only has like maybe 2 family members left that he needs to kill off. And the problem is one of them is in jail, but the other one he can actually get to. And that be the son of the cousin who's in jail. And so we kind of find out his name is Graham. And Graham's going to be the next target for Arnold when it comes to him just going around killing off different people in his family. Now, we do learn that Graham is being, introduced at a big time charity event by Leslie Tompkins. And so for John Paul Valley, his goal is to hopefully find Graham in time and to protect him from his own cousin Arnold. Now, the rest of the book is really more of John Paul Valley trying his best to find Graham because he knows that sooner or later Arnold will find Graham and try to kill him. Now, for Graham, we do learn that he's going on a camping trip with a group of kids who are technically orphans. Now, here's the thing. The reason why Graham is doing this because he is an orphan. Like I said earlier, the other cousin Arnold, Graham's father, is in prison. And the reason why? Because, well, he got his wife killed. And so because of that, it kind of led to Graham becoming an orphan, and he understands what the other kids are actually going through. But either way, while they're heading over to their camping trip, well, that is when they learn that their bus driver is not their usual bus driver. That instead is actually Arnold pretending to be the bus driver to get close to Graham to hopefully kill him off. Now, luckily for Graham, you do have John Paul Valley arrive just in time to actually get on the bus and fight against Arnold. Now, like I said, this is going to be the end of today's video, but it does kind of lead off on a cliffhanger. And the reason why, because like I said earlier, a lot of these books were coming out at the same time, and so it kind of got a tad bit confusing on what is the actual reading order when it comes to Night Quest. But either way, while you have the two characters fight on the bus, John Paul Valley Batman, also Arnold, you have Arnold being able to actually pierce the cape of John Paul Valley. Now, him piercing the cape is going to be very important in later chapters of Night Quest, especially the ending parts of Night Quest. But either way, you do have Arnold being able to get away, and Graham is able to see another day. But for John Paul Valley, he now realized that Arnold got away, which means sooner or later, he might pop back up again and might try to come to Graham or possibly another family member. Okay, so it's time for us to continue our coverage over Night Quest. And guys, I know you're probably hating me right now because we have been doing a lot of videos where it's only one single issue when it comes to Night Quest. But like I said a few videos ago, when it came to Night Quest, it got a tad bit confusing. Let me explain. See, when it came to DC Comics, they made sure that all the different Bat titles actually worked together to tell the story of Nightfall. But when it came to Night Quest, unfortunately, the Bat titles did not work together properly when it came to telling the story of John Paul Valley being Batman. Let me explain. So let's say you were reading a story arc over in Batman Comics, right? The main Batman series. Well, part 1 and part 2 might take place before another story arc that take place over in Detective Comics. So if you're reading a 3-part story arc, the first 2 chapters of that story arc may take place before a different story arc happening over in Detective Comics, or possibly Shadow the Bat, and the list goes on. And so sometimes it got a tad bit confusing of what happened first or what happened next when it came to all the different Bat titles coming out at once. You had Batman, Detective Comics, Shadow the Bat, Tales of the Dark Knight, and the list goes on. You also had Robin, Catwoman, like guys, it was a lot. And so it got a tad bit confusing. Anyways though, today's video, we're going to continue our coverage over Night Quest. And we do pick up with Shadow of the Bat, issue number 25. Now, this should be our last one issue video, because after that we begin to jump back into more 2-part, 3-part story arcs when it comes to Night Quest. Now, this is more Batman battling against a character we have not really talked about before. You see, today we're going to talk about the character known as the Corrosive Man. Now, the Corrosive Man actually first appeared back in Detective Comics issue number 587. His real name is Derek Mitchell. Now, for Derek, he was actually an assassin in Gotham City who worked alongside another character known as Mortimer Cadaver. Now, Mortimer Cadaver was actually an assassin as well, but he double-crossed Derek. And so Derek got arrested. Now, Derek was able to break out of prison, but then he hid in Gotham City Police Department inside a container that was holding all these different kinds of chemicals. The problem was there was a thunderstorm, and so those chemicals unfortunately fell on him and turned him into the Corrosive Man. Now, when it comes to Derek Mitchell, his main goal is to, well, break out of prison again to go after Mortimer Cadaver. Now, for Derek Mitchell, when it comes to him being the Corrosive Man, that technically means he has a lethal touch. If he touches you, most likely you are going to die. But also his skin has been burned away as well. And honestly, he looks pretty cool. Can I say that he's one of those characters that DC made and I feel like that fell through the cracks and we never saw again? And honestly, I wish they use him more often because he looks amazing. He will be a cool character in today's comics. Now, for the Corrosive Man, like I said, his main goal is to break out of prison and go after the one person who had gotten in prison in the first place. And that would be Mortimer Cadaver, his ex-partner who had double-crossed him. You see, for Derek, he believes if that first time he went to prison never happened, he would have never became the Corrosive Man. But he blames Mortimer because he was the reason why he went to prison in the first place. And so we see him currently breaking out of prison to begin the hunt for his ex-partner. But now it's time for us to talk about Joe Public. Now, Joe Public is a very interesting character. Okay, so we got to jump back over to DC Bloodlines. You see, DC Bloodline was a big event in the early 1990s for DC Comics. Their main goal was to bring in new characters and hoping the new characters would bring in new fans into their comic book world. Now, the problem was, though, Bloodlines did not really do that. Instead, Bloodlines kind of like, what in the world is this hot mess? But anyways, Bloodlines did create like 20 new characters, and Joe Public was one of them. You see, in Bloodlines, you had these aliens come down to Earth, and they would feed on people's spinal fluids. Now, sometimes you would die, and the other times you might have your meta gene activated. And so when it came to Joe Public, when you had an alien right then there feeding on his spinal fluid, his meta gene activated, and he became a hero in DC Comics called Joe Public. Now, when it comes to his powers, he has the ability to absorb your power and also your energy as well. Now, technically, he is stationed in Gotham City, and the reason why, because when it came to Bloodlines, he first appeared in Gotham in Shadow of the Bat Annual number 1, I want to say. Either way, he's here right now because he's trying to be a hero in Gotham City. And so we are able to see Joe trying to be a hero and trying to save a young kid from getting beat up by some thugs in the middle of the alley. Now, once you have Joe being able to stop the thugs, you didn't have John Paul Valley being Batman jump in and help Joe take out the last thug. Now, for Batman, at first, he was kind of impressed in the idea of Joe Public trying to be a hero. But then he realized that Joe does not have the skills to recognize some issues going on in that fight. For example, the kid he was trying to save is also a drug runner for a different gang. Now, you have John Paul Valley tell Joe, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, don't be a hero. Matter of fact, go ahead and go home right now and stop trying to be a hero in Gotham City. Now, while you have John Paul Valley trying to tell Joe Public that, you didn't have Batman hear over the radio that the Corrosive Man had broken out of prison. And so for Batman, his main focus now is to stop the Corrosive Man. And so you have John Paul Valley go out of his way to find the Corrosive Man. Now, once you have John Paul being able to find the Corrosive Man, he tries everything he can to actually bring him down. He tries to punch him. He tries to kick him. He even tries to use his gadgets. But nothing really works on the Corrosive Man. And the reason why? Because his entire body now is corrosive. And so for John Paul, he's kind of wondering, what in the world can he do here? And really, when he tries to continue to fight against the Corrosive Man, he loses completely. Now, once you have Corrosive Man defeat Batman and walk away, he tells Batman, who is he going after? His ex-partner, Catwoman. Now, for John Paul Valley, he has no idea who Catwoman is because the last time the Corrosive Man had appeared in DC Comics was when Bruce Wayne was Batman. And so for John Paul Valley, he does not know the entire story of the Corrosive Man. And so you have Joe say, hey, Batman, I'll tell you right now, the guy he's going after is his ex-partner who is currently at a hospital right now because he's dying from brain cancer. But either way, for Batman, it's kind of like, okay, now I know who he's going after. I still got to find a way to actually stop him. Now, the ending of this book is really more of Batman having to work with Joe Public. And let me explain. You see, you have Batman try his best to fight against the Corrosive Man. The problem is, like earlier, everything he tries to do to the Corrosive Man just does not work at all. And so for Batman, it does seem like he is about to lose again. But luckily for Batman, Joe was nearby. And let's not forget that Joe has the ability to absorb people's powers and energy. And so you have Joe use his powers on the Corrosive Man to turn him back into a normal person, to allow John Paul Valley to knock him out with one single punch. And then you have John Paul put sand on top of him just in case he turns back into the Corrosive Man. And that sand should be able to kind of keep him in place, but also make sure he cannot hurt anyone else at all. Now, you also have Batman once again tell Joe Public, like, hey, man, listen, you should not be a hero at all. And I feel like this is Alan Grant saying this. And the reason why, because like I said earlier, Bloodlines was not really a good event for DC Comics. They did create a bunch of new characters, but most of those new characters did not really appear again in DC Comics after that event. And if they did, it was like 4 or 5 more times, and that was really it. Only one character was actually successful in that event, and that would be Hitman. But for Joe Public, he was not really a successful character. And so it's kind of like Alan Grant saying, hey, DC, I made this character. Even I realized that this character kind of sucks. And matter of fact, is now Batman saying, hey, you suck. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest. And I know it has been a while since we actually covered Batman Knightquest, but don't worry, we can go ahead and jump right back into it once again. Now, today we're going to cover Batman issues number 506 and 507. Now, this is a 2-part story arc where it kind of continues the whole idea of John Paul Valley being Batman and trying to hunt down Abattoir, a character who's out there in Gotham City right now, killing off different members of his family. But I'll explain more here in a moment. But even though this 2-part story arc continues that idea of Batman trying to find him, it's also Batman teaming up with another character from the good old Bloodline event. Now, Bloodline was a very interesting event in DC Comics. Let me explain. You see, in the early 1990s, DC had this idea, right? It was called DC Bloodlines. It was basically a way to bring in new readers, but to also bring back old readers as well. And the way to do that was to create a bunch of new characters. You see, DC had this idea where 7 aliens would go down to Earth and begin to drain the spinal fluid of different people across the world. And usually you would die. But occasionally, for some people, you would gain powers. And that is where Bloodlines came in. It gave us a wave of new characters to hopefully be popular enough to carry their own book. Unfortunately, that plan did not work out. Really, only like one, maybe two characters actually did work out. And one of those characters is Hitman. But he's not in this book. We have a different character who came out of Bloodlines in this two-part story arc right here, who's also hunting down the bad guy better known as Abattoir. Now let's have a quick conversation about the character known as Abattoir. Now when it comes to Abattoir, he was a very, to me, low-level Batman villain that DC was really trying to get off the ground because he does appear a lot in Knightquest, and it did seem like DC was trying their best to bring more fans into this actual character. But either way, when it came to Abattoir, he was a person who was going around killing off different members of his family. And the reason why? Because he believed that his family was actually evil. As a matter of fact, every single time he killed off one of his family members, he believed that he was actually absorbing their life energy. Yeah, crazy and wild. But hey, that's Abattoir for you. Now, with that being said, in our last video for that character, he was able to get away, but he was going after one of his cousins in his family. Now, that cousin's name is actually Graham. But either way, he was only able to get away because Batman had to save the life of Graham, but also save the life of a bus full of children. And so Abattoir was able to use that moment to get away for Batman. And so as we dive into Batman issue number 506, it's really more of John Paul Valley continuing his search for Abattoir. Now, the opening pages of this book is kind of reminding us that for John Paul Valley, he's still trying to realize that to be a great Batman, you gotta be a great detective like Bruce Wayne was. And for John Paul Valley, he hated the idea of doing detective work, but now he realized that sometimes you have to do detective work if you are going to be able to find the person that you are actually looking for. Like I said a moment ago, when it came to Abattoir, he was trying to go after his cousin Graham. As we all know, he failed. But there was another cousin who's still alive. The problem is Abattoir is not able to get to that cousin because he is in prison, and that would be Henry. Now, Henry is the father of Graham, but you have Henry call up his lawyer, Walter, and here's the reason why. Because Henry got word that Abattoir tried to kill off his son, Graham. And so this is Henry saying, listen, I want to put a bounty on the head of my cousin because he is crazy. Now, at first, for Walter, he believes that the only reason why Henry is doing this is to get revenge against Abattoir, because Henry is in jail because he killed off his wife. But he killed off his wife with Abattoir helping him. But he went to jail, and Abattoir was able to continue to live his life as a free man. But you have Henry say, no, I'm trying my best to protect my son Graham, because really, Graham will have all the money down the road, and I want to make sure that he stays alive so that we're able to collect the money from him when we need to. And so it's Walter, Henry's lawyer, saying, fine, I'll put a contract on him, and hopefully somebody's able to kill him off for you. But now we have to jump over to a random bar, and when we do, we actually pick up with a character known as Ballistic. Now, Ballistic is one of those bloodline characters. Now, here in a moment, I'll try my best to explain who is Ballistic. But like I said, he's one of those bloodline characters, but right now he is a mercenary, just trying his best to look for some work. And so right now, he walks into this bar to talk to the bartender, asking him, hey, listen, do you know about any contracts out there at all? And the guy says, no, but leave me your card. And just in case I hear something, I'll hand that info over to you so that you're able to collect on that contract once you're able to kill off the person on the contract. Now, I do want to jump over to a group of characters better known as the Malevolent Maniacs. Now, this is a 3-character group here that's really more of debt collectors. And right now you see them going after one of their people who owes them money. But then one of the members of this group hears about the actual contract that was put out on Abattoir. And so you have our three random thugs here agree to go after Abattoir to hopefully collect on that money. And they're going to play a small role in the storyline. Really, this whole two-part story about more about Batman and also by Ballistic, but they're going to be around for different scenes in this actual book. Now, let's sit down and actually talk about Ballistic here. You see, Ballistic first appeared back in Batman Annual number 17. Now, like I said earlier, when it came to Ballistic, he's one of those characters who unfortunately had his spinal fluid drained by one of those aliens back in Bloodlines. And so he did gain an ability, which was his skin was turned into some kind of armor. And so with that and the way he looks, he kind of gave up being a cop and became a mercenary so that he is able to make ends meet. But when it comes to Ballistic, he does get a call from that bartender from earlier saying, hey, listen, man, I got a contract for you. And of course, that contract is to go after Abattoir. And so sooner or later, him and Batman are going to cross paths with one another. And really, speaking of Batman, you have Batman trying to find the people who had actually helped Abattoir break out of Arkham a while back. And so you have Batman just trying his best to find the different people who had actually helped him escape from Arkham. And so you have Batman go to a nearby bar where he had heard that one of Abattoir's close allies is usually at that bar playing pool. Except when Batman arrives at the bar and beats down the person he believed to be working with Abattoir, he realized that he has the wrong guy. But it kind of shows that Batman here, John Paul Valley, is not really trying to do the good detective work. He's trying his best to do the fast and quick detective work so that he is able to find Abattoir at a fast pace. But the problem is him being fast is now him being sloppy. And right now he is making a lot of mistakes. Now, I want to jump back over to the Malevolent Maniac group because you have those three guys realize that there's other bounty hunters out there who are also looking for Abattoir, like, for example, Ballistic. And so right now, their main goal is to hurry up to find Abattoir so that they are able to actually collect the money on him. But they realize that one of the guys who had worked at Abattoir in the past is working or hiding at some kind of warehouse nearby. And so you have our three guys here head over to that warehouse. Now for John Paul Valley, he went back to the Batcave to do some more detective work. And that was when he realized the same guy they went after is the same guy he needs to find as well if he wants to be able to find Abattoir. And so you have Batman also go to that warehouse. Now, once you have John Paul Valley arrive at that warehouse, he runs into the Malevolent Maniac group and they begin to fight against one another. Well, they're about to. But then you have Ballistic appear to kind of show that you have three different groups right now, three different parties trying their best to find Abattoir. Now, two of them are trying to get the money. One of them just wants to bring the bad guy down. Either way, it does seem like all three parties are about to fight against one another. Now, as we dive into Batman issue number 507, the second chapter for today's video, I do want to establish that this is not the first time you're having Batman and also Ballistic meet one another. They met back in Batman Annual number 17. Now, with that being said, you're going to have the two characters actually working together to fight against the Malevolent Maniac group. And so you do get a few pages of our two heroes being able to actually work together. Now, with that being said, you do have one of the gang members being able to find a tank of gas, and then you have the gang actually light the gas tank up, causing a small explosion in the actual warehouse so that they are able to get away from Batman and Ballistic and then continue on to hopefully find Abattoir to hopefully bring him in to get that money. Now, for Batman and also Ballistic, they're able to work together to actually save the lives of all the people who were trapped inside the warehouse. Now, let's not forget that one of the people who were actually in the warehouse was one of the guys who worked with Abattoir. And so our heroes were hoping to get to him to question him to hopefully find Abattoir. The problem is that he is unconscious. And so for Batman, they don't have time to wait for him to wake back up. They have to move on. Now, you do have Batman and Ballistic agree to work together to hopefully find Abattoir. And for John Paul Valley, he knows that Ballistic is only doing this really because of the money. But at the same time, for Ballistic, he was a cop in the past. He hates the idea of some serial killer being out there causing lives to be lost because of some weird things going on with his family. And so you have our two heroes agree to actually work together. Now, for Batman, he tells Ballistic that he knows another person that might be able to help them figure out where Abattoir is at. That guy would be Ralph Luxor. Now, for Ralph Luxor, he works and owns a nightclub in Gotham City. And they said, hey, you know what? Let's go there right now to hopefully find this guy, to hopefully find Abattoir. Now, while you have our two heroes head over there, we did jump back over to the Malevolent Maniacs, because you have that group right there also going the same place, because he also got word that Ralph Luxor might also know where Abattoir is at. And so you have both sides go there. Now, when both sides arrive, well, of course, you have both sides now fighting against one another. Now, while you have both sides fighting against one another, you did have Ralph Luxor calling his security team, who apparently has guns as well. And so it turns into a huge battle between all three parties. Now, it does get to the point where you have the Malevolent Maniacs being able to actually corner Luxor while you have everyone kind of fighting against each other. Now, for Ralph Luxor, he's trying his best to tell the leader of that group, like, he has no idea where Abattoir is at. But this guy is not trying to listen at all. He believes that Ralph Luxor may actually know where he is at. And so you have the leader actually kill off Ralph Luxor. Now, at first, he counted down from 3, hoping that it scared Ralph to actually share that piece of information. Unfortunately, he kills a guy off, and now he's definitely not able to get any kind of info at all from Ralph. And for Batman and Ballistic, they saw what happened. And so they were able to work together to take down the entire gang. But then you have Batman wondering, why in the world is this gang also after Abattoir for? And that is when they say, listen, there is a contract out on his head for $100,000. And so we believe that we should be the ones to find him so that we are able to actually collect on that money. Now, for Batman and Ballistic, they realize that that means there are other bounty hunters out there. And honestly, they don't want other bounty hunters chasing down Abattoir. And so you have Batman as a gang. How were you supposed to collect the money if you were able to actually finish the contract? And so for the ending of this video, you do have Batman and also Ballistic head over to the home of Walter, the lawyer of Henry, who's the cousin in jail of Abattoir. Now, once you have Ballistic being able to get the money from Walter, you then have Batman say, hey, you know what? I need all the listing of all the properties that Henry owns, kind of hinting at the idea that maybe Abattoir is just hiding out in one of those homes across Gotham City. But this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest. Now remember, this is the second part in the Nightfall trilogy. Now when it comes to Knightquest, it's really more us seeing John Paul Valley being the Batman of Gotham City, but over time becoming darker, but also more aggressive than the previous Batman, Bruce Wayne. Now with that being said, in our last few videos when it comes to Batman Knightquest, it's really more part of John Paul Valley trying to chase down one particular villain, and that would be Abattoir. Now, we had actually talked about this character in our last few videos. Now, when it comes to Abattoir, he's one of those C-list characters in DC Comics, especially in Batman comics. Now, when it comes to Abattoir, his main goal is to go after his entire family, to kill them off. And the reason why? Because he feels like his family is truly evil. And so his main goal right now, like I said, is to kill off his entire family. Now, when it comes to Abattoir, in a previous video, him and Batman actually fought against one another. And the reason why, because for Abattoir, he was able to hunt down one of his cousins, and that would be Graham. Now, Graham was actually running for mayor of Gotham City, but he also was on a camping trip with a bus full of children. Either way, when it came to Abattoir, he was trying his best to kill off his cousin. But luckily for Graham, Batman had arrived. Now for Batman, he had no choice but to go ahead and save the lives of the children, but also Graham. But while doing that, well, Abattoir got away once again. And so is Batman right now just trying his best to hunt down Abattoir to hopefully and finally bring him in. Now this two-part story arc is not really about Abattoir, it's about two other characters who have not been seen in a good while by this point in DC Comics, especially in Batman comics, and that would be the Clayfaces. Now, before we are able to dive into the whole idea of the Clayfaces coming after Batman, we have to jump over to Leslie Tompkins. Now, when it comes to Leslie, she has huge connections to Bruce Wayne, the previous Batman, but she has almost no connections to the current Batman, John Paul Valley. Now, when it comes to Leslie, she was called in because those boys who saw Batman fight against Abattoir were kind of scarred by that battle. They almost died because the bus had almost crashed and had almost killed them. But luckily, Batman has saved their lives. Either way, you have Leslie right now trying to be that therapist for them and kind of help them get through what they had went through in recent hours with Batman fighting against Abattoir. Now, Graham is there as well, but for Graham, it's more of like, listen, I need you to focus on them. I'm okay, but these boys right here, they are young. They still have their entire lives ahead of them. And I hate the idea that they were scarred by seeing Batman fighting against Abattoir, but almost dying on that bus as well. Now, for John Paul Valley, who is the current Batman at this point in DC Comics, his main goal is to find Abattoir and to hopefully bring him in for the crimes that he had committed, but to also make sure that he does not have the ability to go out of his way to kill off other family members. Now, with that being said, when it comes to Batman, while just traveling around Gotham City, well, out of nowhere, he's actually attacked by a gargoyle. Now, this seems a tad bit weird, but this brings in the first of two Clayfaces that we are going to see in today's video. Now, this Clayface is actually Lady Clayface, and really, I feel I need to sit down and talk a tad bit more about Lady Clayface and her place in DC Comics. Now, just in case you are a tad bit confused of why I called her Lady Clayface and not just Lady Clay, because in DC Comics, she goes by both names. Now, with that being said, when it comes to Lady Clayface, she is actually the fourth Clayface by this point in DC Comics. And there were plenty more that came after her in the late 1990s going into the early 2000s. Now, with all that being said, for Lady Clayface, the only reason why she had gained her powers because she was changed by the Cobra cult. Now, really, she had agreed to go through one of their experiments. And the reason why, because she hated her face. She wanted a different face. And so once she went through the actual experiment, well, it changed her into Lady Clayface. But getting back over to the main story, we see her attacking Batman. Now, it does seem like she does not really want to attack him at all, but she's being forced to actually battle against him. And the question is right now, why are you being forced to fight against Batman if you don't want to. Now, we also learned that apparently she had been missing for a good while since her last appearance in DC Comics. And the question is right now, where has she been for this long? And so we learned that apparently when it came to Lady Clayface, she has been hanging out with Clayface 3. Now, Clayface 3 is a tad bit different from the other Clayfaces, and let me explain. You see, when it comes to Clayface 3, he was actually somebody who was born in a way where his body appearance was not very appealing to other people. And matter of fact, as he grew up, he began to hate the way he looked. And so what he did was he hunted down Matt Hagen, the second Clayface, to collect a blood sample from him and to use that blood sample as a way to gain Clay-like abilities like Matt Hagen has or Lady Clayface. Either way, when he tried to use that blood sample, it made his body even worse. You see, thanks to that blood sample, it did change Clayface. It began to melt his body away, turning him into a clay-like character. But on top of that, he also gained corrosive touch, meaning that if he touched you, he could easily melt you. And so at first, it was so much for him to handle. The whole idea that one, he looked even worse after using that blood sample, but also now he could no longer touch people thanks to his corrosive touch. But we also learned that if he does not go out of his way to kind of release his corrosive touch onto other people, his body will begin to feel a huge amount of pain. So much pain that he'll have a hard time trying to control it, to get over it. And so he has no choice to go ahead and touch other people to kind of release that pain in his body. But apparently Clayface 3 and Lady Clayface, they have been hanging out with one another and building a, well, relationship with one another. Now, as we jump back over to the battle between Batman and Lady Clayface, it does go back and forth for a few more pages, but then kind of like, listen, if she's back in Gotham, that means that the other Clayface, Clayface 3, must also be back in Gotham as well. And the question is right now, where is he? And why did both Clayfaces come back to Gotham for? What in the world is currently going on? And so we learned that for Clayface 3, he's also in Gotham, but for some strange reason, he's going after Graham. And the question is right now, why in the world is Clayface 3 going after Graham for? Is there some kind of connection between Clayface 3 and Abattoir as well? Are they possibly related to one another in some kind of weird way? Now we do get another flashback, and really this flashback is being used as a way to explain what were the Clayfaces doing while they were away from Gotham City. Now we do learn that apparently both the Clayfaces were together building up that Clayface relationship, but they were hiding out in a cave away from Gotham City. But like I said earlier, when it comes to Clayface 3, if he does not release that corrosive energy inside his body, he'll begin to feel pain all over his body. And so one night for Lady Clayface, she woke up and realized that he was gone. And the reason why, because he went outside and pretended to be a hitchhiker. Somebody had actually pulled over thinking they need to help him, but in reality, he grasped him and melted him away completely as a way to release his corrosive energy. And so he realized that unfortunately, even though he wants to be with Lady Clayface, he still needs to kill somebody every once in a while to release that corrosive energy inside of him. But to continue on with the flashback, we do learn that apparently after they realize that the only way to kind of help out Clayface 3 is to find a cure for his disease. Now, technically, the disease he has came from Clayface 2 blood sample, but either way, they can't find any kind of cure at all. But the two of them don't want to give up. They want to find a way to save his life. And the reason why? Because Clayface 3 was able to, well, get Clayface 4, Lady Clayface, pregnant. They're going to be parents. And so it seemed like maybe they came to Gotham because she is pregnant, or possibly because, well, they had the baby. But we then jump back over to the present day. And when we do, we pick back up with Clayface 3 just fighting his way over to Graham by killing off officers one by one. Just by touching them, they melt away completely. Now for Leslie, she want to try her best to protect Graham, but Graham's all like, nah, it's not worth your life to try to protect me. Right now, let him go ahead and take me away. Let him kidnap me because I need you alive to take care of the boys who still need you as their therapist. And so just like that, Clayface 3 grabs Graham and they get the heck out of there. But again, we're still wondering, why did he grab Graham for? But the last page of the first chapter of the story arc is really more of us seeing Batman possibly dying here, because you do have Lady Clayface change her body in a way where she's kind of like a snake squeezing the body of Batman, slowly going to break him and possibly killing him off. But as we dive into the next chapter, we learn that John Paul Valley was able to hit a button. Now, the only reason why he was able to hit that button is because for Lady Clayface, she was still kind of unsure about the idea of killing off Batman. So while she was kind of relaxing her body, he was able to hit that button to release a huge amount of energy to shock her, but to also knock her out. So Batman survives. But now we jump back over to Clayface 3. Now, when we do pick up with Commissioner Gordon and his team arriving to realize that, yes, Clayface 3 is back in the city once again. Now, the question is right now, why did he grab Graham? What was the actual purpose of him going after Graham for? There must be a special reason. But when we jump over to Clayface 3, he's trying his best to hide from the cops. But now he must take Graham over to somewhere else. But now we have to jump over to Abattoir. Now, when we do, we actually see him with a baby. It's kind of like, okay, is this baby possibly the child of the Clayfaces, or could this child, this baby, be related to Abattoir in some kind of way? Because remember, his main purpose in life right now is to kill off every single member of his family. Now, for the baby, he's crying because he wants his mom. He wants his dad. And so you have Abattoir say, you know what? Let me sit down and read you a story from your mom's book, your mom's diary. Now, really, this flashback is really more about the idea of seeing the Clayfaces go through the pregnancy. This flashback is all about them, but it is the story that Abattoir is telling the young boy. Now, we do learn that while you have the Clayfaces trying to get through the actual pregnancy, they begin to get worried about the idea of their child not coming out normal. And honestly, that is a very good reason to be scared, because you are actually talking about the idea of giving birth to another Clayface. But even though they're very worried of the possibility of their child not coming out normal, they're still excited about the idea of doing this together. They are excited about the idea of being parents, being a family. Now, before we are able to continue to dive deeper into that flashback, we jump back over to Batman, who's still with Lady Clayface, where once she does wake up, she tries to attack him again, but then she's unable to actually fight him because she took so much damage in that battle earlier. But while she collapsed once again on the ground, she does tell Batman, "You could deem my baby to death." And so now we officially know that Abattoir is the one who's holding on to her child. But again, why does Abattoir have the child of Lady Clayface? But before we are able to get that answer, we jump back over to Abattoir, who's still kind of giving that story over to the baby of Lady Clayface in Clayface 3. Now, we do learn that when she had given birth to him, it was really more just a bunch of clay falling out of her body. But on top of that, they have no idea if it is a boy or a girl. Now, for me personally, it does kind of look like a boy, but right now, apparently it is genderless. Either way, we do get confirmation that Abattoir is holding on to the child of Lady Clayface in Clayface 3. But again, why? There has to be a reason why. But as we jump back over to Batman, we see Batman finding a note on Lady Clayface that does tell Batman that yes, she had a child, but that child is currently with Abattoir. Now, this leads into us finally finding out why was she coming after Batman for? Why does Abattoir have the baby of Lady Clayface and Clayface 3? Well, let me explain. Now remember, when it came to two Clayfaces, they were living in a cave away from Gotham City as a way to hide from all their problems. Except when they came back home to their cave, they realized that well, their baby is missing. Somebody had kidnapped the baby. And the question is right now, who? Who had kidnapped their child? And so when it came to Clayface, they realized it was Abattoir. But he said, listen, if you want your kid back, you have to help me achieve two of my goals. The first is that you got to kill off Batman. I want him dead. And second thing is, I want you guys to find my cousin Graham. Because again, for Abattoir, his main goal is to kill off his entire family. And Graham right now is his next target, but the Batman stands in his way. And so that is why you have the Clayfaces going after Batman, but also going after Graham. And so really the rest of the book is really more of Clayface 3 delivering Graham over to Abattoir. But the problem is for Clayface 3, even though he hands over Graham to Abattoir, he's still mad at Abattoir for kidnapping his child. And so you have Clayface 3 trying to kill off Abattoir, but you didn't have Batman step in. Now, while you have Batman and Clayface 3 fighting against each other, you didn't have Abattoir try to run over Batman and Clayface 3. You do have the two characters being able to dodge the car, and Abattoir is able to get away. Now, the only reason why he was able to get away because the baby was about to fall on some phone lines and most likely be killed by those phone lines. And so once again in Knightquest, you have Batman going out of his way to save a baby. That is now twice where Batman has saved a baby in Knightquest alone. Either way, after doing that, Abattoir was able to get away once again, but this time with his cousin Graham, and most likely is gonna kill off Graham. But on top of that, for Clayface 3, he still wants to leave with his son and not go back to jail. But for Batman, it's kind of like, no, you gotta go back to jail. You just kidnap a guy and hand that guy over to another villain. Like, you broke some laws there, dude. You gotta go to jail. I understand you hate the idea of your child being locked away as well because it's a clay baby, but unfortunately, you gotta go to jail for your crimes. And so you have Batman being able to just take down Clayface 3 in a matter of a few panels. And so just like that, Clayface 3, Lady Clayface, they're in jail. Their baby is going somewhere to hopefully be cured of its clay problem. Now, for me personally, the book ends on one heck of a note because we do learn that Abattoir has put Graham in some kind of torturing device. So right now, Graham is laying on top of a bunch of oversized nails. Now, right now, he's not being punctured by those nails yet. But the thing is, on top of him is a weight system. Every single hour, that weight system will get heavier and heavier on his body, pushing him down on the actual nails. And so each hour he'll go through a slow and painful death until it reaches the point where he is officially killed off by those nails. It's one heck of a way to die. Like, this man is truly messed up. But either way, this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see you next time. Later. Okay, so we have reached a point where we're almost done with our coverage over Batman Knightquest. Now, before we are able to properly move into Night Sin, we still got to cover Knightquest The Search. Now, for me personally, Knightquest The Search was more of like the interlude between Knightquest and Night Sin. Now, with that being said, when it comes to Knightquest, we still have like 4 more chapters to actually cover before we can move on to The Search. and then to Night Sin. Now, with that being said, today's video, we're only covering 2 of the last 4 chapters we have to cover. The next video is going to end everything for us when it comes to Knightquest. Now, with that being said, you're going to see a lot of moving pieces being used as a way to wrap up some loose ends that we were seeing in Knightquest, but also kind of setting up things to come for Night's End. And so with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the first chapter of today's video. And that will be Detective Comics 674. Now, as we get into the opening pages for Detective Comics 674, we kind of get the idea the book is trying to remind us that John Paul Valley is almost at the tail end of being that Batman that Gotham does not need technically. And what I mean by that statement is that really at the tail end of Nightfall, but going into Knightquest, we kind of had the idea that John Paul Valley was going to be the more aggressive Batman, way more aggressive than Bruce Wayne was when he was Batman. Less detective work and more of, let's go ahead and just beat a few bad guys to get the answers that I'm looking for different cases. But the problem was, though, for John Paul Valley, he had something inside of him called the system. Now, I'll explain more about the system as we get into the tail end of this video, but just know that the system and also him being more aggressive is kind of leading him down a dark path, a path where he might completely cross the line as a hero. And really, as we went through Knightquest, we had so many examples of him about to cross that line, but only being stopped by other people who were afraid of him of crossing that line. Like, for example, he almost killed off the Joker in the middle of Knightquest. Now, honestly, I feel like that should have been okay. But again, it's the whole idea that he is a hero and he can't cross that line. He's trying to carry on the legacy of Batman where Bruce Wayne had left it at. Now, for Detective Comics issue number 674, it's also special because it's bringing in 2 new characters into the world of Batman comics, and that will be Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny. Now, these 2 characters, they are basically a couple, but they're mercenaries. If you have the money to pay them, they should be able to take out a target for you. And really, in this issue alone, we get a good example of how good they are as snipers because they were able to take out their target 16 miles away. Now, the person they had killed is actually going to be very important for the second half of this first chapter of our video. But just know that this was their first appearance ever in Batman comics. Now, with this guy being murdered at his own birthday party, it does bring in the GCPD. Now, this case, it does get handed over to Harvey Bullock and also Renee Montoya. Now, with that being said, they are informed that the person who had killed this guy off had to use some kind of sniper, but killed him from 16 miles away from a very tall building. Now, for Harvey Bullock, he knows the one person to go to when it comes to the idea of hanging out on the rooftops. He knows he has to reach out to Batman to hopefully have Batman find a sniper person and bring them down for the crimes that they had committed. Now, for Harvey Bullock, he kind of lied when it came to reaching out to John Paul Valley Batman by saying like, hey, listen, I got some information about Bane. But in reality, he doesn't. It's really more him saying like, hey, I need you to handle this. Somebody in Gotham was able to kill a guy with a sniper 16 miles away. I'm going to need you to find this person and bring them down because like, hey, you're a hero, right? You're trying to protect Gotham. Well, guess what? Get to work. But it also kind of shows that for John Paul Valley Batman, he's not really trying to work with Harvey Bullock nor Jim Gordon. He's no longer working with the GCPD like Bruce Wayne did in the past. Now, I want to jump back over to Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny. And the reason why, because you had those two characters, after they were able to complete their last contract, they had actually went back home that's far away from Gotham. But one night you had Gun Hawk just reading a magazine. And while reading that magazine, he hears that there's going to be a gun convention back in Gotham City. And apparently in that gun convention, they're going to show off some new weapon that the military said no to, but only because the government said no. But apparently it's going to be very powerful. And so for Gun Hawk, his whole idea is to go back to Gotham to hopefully get that gun because he loves how great it looks and how powerful it truly is. And so they agree to go back to Gotham. Now, I want to jump back over to Gotham City and pick up with John Paul Valley being Batman because you have him trying to do some detective work to figure out who in the world killed that guy from earlier. Now, for John Paul, he knew that if somebody had used a sniper that far away, they are a mercenary, which means somebody had to pay that mercenary to kill off that guy. And so for Batman, he figured out it had to be a guy known as Arnold Heckert. Now, for Arnold, he owns a waste management company, but what he was doing was illegal dumping. And apparently the guy who got killed off was going to expose him to the entire world of what he was doing. And so what you had Arnold did next was threw a birthday party, but he also hired the mercenaries, Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny, to kill off that guy before he would be able to expose Arnold for what he was doing. Again, illegal dumping. And so with that information, you now have Batman being able to kind of figure out who was the mercenary who killed that guy off earlier, because Arnold told him it's a guy known as Gun Hawk. Now, it does not take John Paul Valley that long to figure out who this Gun Hawk person is, because once he does go back over to the Bat computer and does his research, he was able to learn who Gun Hawk is, but also to see if Gun Hawk was back in Gotham. And just by pure luck, well, Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny are back in Gotham for that gun convention. Now, the rest of the first chapter of today's video is really more of John Paul Valley being Batman and going after the Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny duo. Now, while trying to go after them, let's not forget, they're at this gun convention. So at first, it's just Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny trying to shoot down Batman. But by the tail end of the actual battle, you have other people who were at that convention beginning to use their guns as well. And so one of their bullets had actually hit Gun Bunny. And so you have Gun Hawk grab Gun Bunny to get the heck out of there, hoping that his girlfriend will actually survive. Now, with that being said, for John Paul Valley Batman, he actually hangs back. And the reason why, because his armor suit was shot up a lot thanks to Gun Hawk and other people at that gun convention. So the way the book kind of ends for the first chapter of today's video, we're kind of left to believe in the possibility that John Paul Valley is dead. His whole entire armor suit was shot up like no other. Now, as we get into Batman issue number 508, it actually does pick up moments after the ending of the last chapter where we do get confirmation that Batman is A-okay. But for Batman, he's very upset because once again, he allowed another villain to get away. Gun Hawk. Now, the other person he allowed to get away is a character known as Abattoir. Now, we had actually talked about this character in the past in our earlier parts of our coverage over Knightquest. Now, remember, when it comes to Abattoir, he was like this C-list character that DC was trying to make into at least a B-list character. Now, for Abattoir, he was this guy who was going around killing off different members of his family. And the reason why, because he believed that his entire family was actually evil and they deserved to, well, die. And so we kept seeing him going after different members of his family. But at this point in Knightquest, he was always trying to go after one family member, Graham. Now, in our last video for Knightquest, he was able to get to Graham and actually take him as a hostage and put Graham in some kind of torturing machine. And really, the kind of torturing machine that Graham is in is completely messed up. So you have Graham currently laying on top of a bed of nails. Now, here's the thing. He is tied down the bed of nails, but every hour, one weight is going to drop on top of him, pushing him down on the nail. So every single hour, he gets heavier and heavier and continues to get pushed deeper and deeper into the nails until he officially dies. And it's kind of like, okay, can John Paul Valley Batman save this man in time before he is officially killed off by his crazy cousin, Abattoir? Now, I want to jump over to Robin. Now, remember, around this time in DC Comics, Tim Drake was the Robin for Batman, or really for Bruce Wayne Batman, not John Paul Valley Batman. The reason why, because to John Paul Valley, he did not see the actual purpose of having a sidekick. But for Robin, he hated the idea of just leaving Gotham for John Paul Valley to watch over, because he knew that John Paul was kind of, well, losing it. Now, for Tim, he would always try to sneak into the Batcave when John Paul was away. Now, for Tim, he's also trying to find Abattoir. And so for Tim Drake, he was able to kind of realize that in the actual family of Abattoir, there were different properties that was bought out by the family. And so for Robin, he was able to do some detective work and realize which of the properties is Abattoir is actually hiding out at. And so you have Tim leave and hoping to get there in time before John Paul Valley gets there. Now, the rest of this chapter is really more of Tim Drake being able to arrive at the scene just in time to see John Paul Valley chasing down Abattoir. Now, their battle goes all over the place, but then it does end up inside a factory where you actually have both John Paul Valley and Abattoir kind of fighting over a furnace. Now, here's the thing. By the end of their battle, you actually have Abattoir hanging for his life right over the actual furnace. Now, you would think that John Paul Valley has not officially crossed that line yet, and he would try to save the life of Abattoir, even though this man deserves to actually die. But while you have Tim walk into the room, he realized that there's something wrong with John Paul Valley, like something has officially taken over him. And then Tim remembers that for John Paul Valley, he has the system installed in his mind. Now, we had talked about the system before. The system was something programmed into the mind of John Paul Valley when he was becoming the next Azrael, the avenging angel for the Order of St. Dumas. As a matter of fact, when he was becoming the new Azrael, Bruce Wayne found him and said, hey, listen, don't go there. Come back to Gotham with me and become the next Batman down the road. And so ever since then, you had John Paul Valley trying his best to leave behind the Order of St. Dumas. But like I said, they have programmed the system inside his mind. Now, when it comes to the system, it's actually a program in his mind that kind of helps them be ready for different kinds of situations, to give him the fighting skills he needs to get out of those tight situations. Now, when it came to John Paul Valley, he was become the next Azrael to replace his father, who was the previous Azrael. Now, when it came to the system, we had many examples of the system kind of changing in his mind. And let me explain, because over time, he would begin to see St. Dumas, the actual, not demon, sorry, but the actual being that the Order of St. Dumas actually praises. Now, here's the thing. When it came to St. Dumas, they told Azrael, you need to lead Gotham into a better version of itself, to lead it into the light. You have now picked up the mantle of the Dark Knight, and it's time for you to lead this dark city into the light. Now, over time, when it came to the system, he also began to see his father. Now, when it came to his father, he was all like, no, you have to follow the actual Order of St. Dumas and be this avenging angel. And so, as we get into the ending of today's video, when it comes to the system, he's now seeing both his father and also, well, St. Dumas. Now, again, for St. Dumas, it's more of, hey, do not kill that guy off, arrest him and hand him over to the cops and continue your work in trying to lead this dark city into the light. But for his father, his dad is saying, no, you need to kill this guy because if you don't, he'll just come back and kill again. Why not go ahead and end this crazy life cycle in Gotham City? And so by the time you have John Paul come back to, well, for Abattoir, he had failed inside that furnace. And so he had officially died. And when he had failed in, well, Tim Drake was there. And so for Tim, it's kind of like, oh my God, did John Paul just cross that line and allow that man to die? Now, the ending of this book, it kind of tells us two things. The first is that because you have Batman go back to the Batcave, he was not able to find Graham. And so, unfortunately, Graham dies by the hands of that torturing machine. Now, for John Paul Valley, when he gets back to the Batcave, this is the sign that the man's mind is completely broken. Because thanks to the system, but also seeing his father and also Saint Dumas, the man trying to figure out which path to actually take, it breaks his mind. This is the point where we can officially say the man has lost his sanity. And the book ends on that note right there. What's going on there, YouTube? Welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, so we're going to continue our coverage over Batman Knightquest. And really, we're at the point where we're going to wrap up our coverage over Batman Knightquest. Now, before we are able to dive into Night's End, we have to cover the search. Now, in my last video, I kind of explained what the search is all about. You see, when it came to the Nightfall trilogy, you had Nightfall, Knightquest, and Night's End. Now, with all that being said, between Knightquest and Night's End, you had this interlude called Knightquest The Search, where you have Bruce Wayne out there trying his best to find Jack Drake, but to also begin the process of bringing Bruce Wayne back into Gotham to possibly retake the role of Batman. Now, with all that being said, when it comes to the end of Knightquest, we're really going to see that John Paul Valley has gone too far when it comes to him being Batman, to the point where now you're going to have Jim Gordon turn his back with the idea of helping out Batman protecting Gotham City. And you'll see what I mean as we go through today's video. But by this point in our coverage over Knightquest, we can tell that maybe it's time for John Paul Valley to retire and bring back Batman, who can at least follow the rules when it comes to being a hero in the world of DC Comics. And the reason why I'm saying all this because in our last few videos over Knightquest, we have seen John Paul Valley go up against different characters that Batman have fought over the years. And he has been able to take every single one of them out without the possibility of killing them. But in our last video, we saw John Paul Valley unfortunately killed off a character known as Abattoir. Now, technically, when it came to Abattoir, John Paul Valley could have saved his life, but John Paul Valley was fighting against the system that was inside his mind. Now, we had talked about the system before. You see, when it comes to John Paul Valley, before he was supposed to be the next Batman, he was supposed to be the next Azrael. Let me explain. You see, there is this order, better known as the Order of Saint Dumas. Now, for this group of people, they always had this avenging angel, just in case people try to cross the order in some kind of way. And with that being said, it was sent out their avenging angel to handle those different kinds of people. And of course, their avenging angel was Azrael. Now for John Paul Valley, before him, his father was the Azrael in the current time of DC Comics. But his dad died on duty. And so after dying, his dad made sure that John Paul Valley would be ready to take up the mantle by placing in his mind something called the system. Now, the system is basically this mental implant where it has John Paul Valley's mind and body to be ready to become the next Azrael, but to also know everything about the Order of Saint Dumas, but to also make sure that his son knows how to fight. And so when it came to John Paul Valley, he was fighting against the system. When it came to Abattoir, hanging for his life, who had unfortunately fell to his death. And so right now, with the idea of Abattoir dying in the earlier parts of Knightquest, you now have Jim Gordon kind of wondering, can he allow this Batman still out there in Gotham City? Can he allow this Batman to work in Gotham City? Now, we do get a page that's technically dedicated over to a group called the Rats. And the Rats is a small gang in Gotham City. And their goal right now is try to begin to build some kind of empire in Gotham City to make a lot of money. They're actually thinking about doing a protection ring in Gotham City, in a rich area of Gotham. And so they do play a small role in today's video, but we're going to see them again at the end of the first chapter of today's video. But shifting our focus back over to John Paul Valley Batman, with the death of Abattoir, is kind of showing John Paul Valley that maybe it's okay to sometimes cross that line when it comes to protecting Gotham City. So just in case he has to fight against the Joker, and it gets to the point where he has to kill off the Joker, he'll be okay with the idea of killing off the Joker, because in his mind right now, it is perfectly okay to cross that line. But here comes the problem though. You see, with the death of Abattoir, they cannot find his hostage. Now, when it came to Abattoir, he was this character who would go after different members of his family and try to kill them all because he believed that his entire family was truly evil. And so in our last video, we saw Abattoir being able to capture his cousin Graham and try to kill him off by using some kind of torturing machine. But here's the problem. With the death of Abattoir, the GCPD nor Batman knows where Abattoir had hid Graham at. And so Graham died at the end of our last video because no one was able to find him in time to free him from the torturing machine. And so right now you have the GCPD trying their best to figure out where is Graham at and hoping to find him before he officially dies, even though we already know that he is dead. And really, it does not take the GCPD that long to figure out where Graham could possibly be yet. And so when they find the last building that was owned by Abattoir's family, when they walk inside that warehouse, they find the dead body of Graham. And of course, they have to report this back over to Jim Gordon. Now, once he gets word, he is officially done because he blames Batman for the death of Graham because he hears that Graham was inside some kind of torturing device. And so for Jim Gordon, it's more of like, if Batman did not kill off Abattoir, we could have most likely found Graham in time and saved his life. But because Batman had killed off Abattoir, we were not able to find Graham in time, and now he's officially dead. And so now it's Jim saying, I need to have a meeting with the Batman. Now, the meeting between Batman and Jim Gordon does not go as well as you would think it would. Like, actually, you would think it would go bad because for Jim Gordon, he now knows that this is not the same Batman that he had worked with in the past. He knows that this must be somebody else. But at the same time, he's also upset about the fact that this Batman has crossed the line. Now, for John Paul Valley, he said, listen, you have to realize if we had followed your system, your government system here, and try to use the justice system to lock away Abattoir, then most likely he will break out of prison again, come back to Gotham, kill off more people who stand in his way. And so for me, I had ended the cycle. With him being gone, other people may now live and survive and have a normal life. But for Jim Gordon, it's still the whole idea that they're not following the laws. They're not following the justice system. But for Batman, John Paul Valley, he does not care. And he just leaves. Say, hey, you know what? Do not call me back here unless it is an emergency. But you didn't have Jim Gordon go ahead and smash the bat signal to say Batman is no longer working with the GCPD no more. Now, the next few pages of this actual chapter of Knightquest is really more of us seeing Batman just being this brutal character because we now see him beating down on all those different gangs of the Rats who are trying to build up a protection ring in Gotham City. And their ring idea Well, it falls apart very quickly thanks to Batman. But while he's fighting against all these different members of the gang, it kind of shows how aggressive he is. He is literally beating them down, breaking their bones, breaking their arms, legs, nose, whatever. He is breaking everything, being this bloody, brutal character. And really, you have Jim Gordon on the radio just listening in on what had happened when it came to Batman stopping that gang. Because now you have Jim Gordon hearing all these different calls of how badly Batman had beaten different members of the gang. Some of them broken legs, broken arms. Some of them are just sprains. Some of them might have brain injuries. Who knows? It's a long list of different things that they're all going through right now, thanks to Batman, who had brutally beaten them. And so now is Jim wondering what to do with this new Batman. The ending of the first chapter of today's video is really more of John Paul Valley getting back over to the Batcave and now beginning to work on new designs for his bat suit to use against the criminals of Gotham City. And so now we move our way into the final chapter of Batman Knightquest. Now, the final chapter does take place in Detective Comics issue number 675. Now, in the opening pages of this chapter alone, we do see that John Paul Valley had created some new kind of weapons in his gauntlets, where he's now able to shoot out projectiles towards his enemies. And that's going to be somewhat important for the final chapter of Knightquest. Now, the final chapter of Batman Knightquest is also trying to wrap up some loose ends. So, for example, the whole idea of Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny. You see, Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny were a couple of characters who were madly in love with one another, but they also had a love for guns as well. And the reason why I'm bringing that up because when we last saw them, they were trying to steal a new kind of weapon that was being shown off at some kind of gun convention. Now, Batman did arrive and try to do battle against them, but he did lose that battle. But when it came to Gun Bunny, she was shot on accident by an innocent person at that gun convention. And so with that happening, Gun Hawk grabbed her and just disappeared. And so we were kind of left to wonder what happened to her. Well, now we see that he is finally bringing her over to the hospital to get her some help because he was in hiding because he knew sooner or later the GCPD or Batman might find them. Now, with Gun Hawk being able to really take hold of an entire hospital under siege, you didn't have the GCPD arrive. Now, when they do arrive, they're not being led by Commissioner Gordon. Instead, they're being led by a character known as Kitch. Now, when it comes to Kitch, he is actually a lieutenant on the police force, but his main goal is to figure out how to resolve this situation here at the moment. But while you have all the different officers getting set up, one of the officers realized that there's movement on the top of the hospital building. And we already know who that is. It is Batman, because John Paul Valley wants to bring Gun Hawk and Gun Bunny in for the crimes they had committed in the earlier parts of Knightquest. Now, really, the rest of the book is really more of just Batman fighting against, well, Gun Hawk. Well, you have the doctors trying their best to save the life of Gun Bunny. And so the last 12, 13 pages is just Batman trying his best to find the best way to bring down Gun Hawk, which really, by the end of the book, he was able to take down Gun Hawk. Now, Batman does disappear as you have the GCPD move inside the building, where they find Gun Hawk on the ground. And we do learn that Gun Bunny did survive the surgery that the doctors were trying to give her. They were able to remove the bullet inside of her. But either way, at the end of this book, it's more of the police wondering, is it a good thing to have Batman around, or is it a bad thing to have Batman around? But either way, this is where we end the Knightquest storyline and begin our work on Knightquest The Search. But with that being said, guys, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.